Chapter 874. As mentioned before, although the temple did not care about Tang En's request to talk, they were still very interested in how to kill him. For this, Varen and the other higher-ups of the temple had made a lot of preparations. For example, they had arranged a large number of knights outside Holy Light City. In fact, this was also because they were frightened by the commotion caused by Tang En the last time he came to the temple. So this time, they decided to fight outside the city to prevent the temple's inner buildings from being damaged again. Of course, with Tang En's strength and battle record, if they only send out ordinary knights, it would be no different from asking for a beating. At the very least, they had to find someone who could deal with him. It would be best if they could stall him. This way, the experts hidden in the temple would be able to arrive in time to settle the matter. Therefore, a holy head knight commander like Reiser, who had the responsibility of leading the knights, was naturally the most suitable candidate. As for why Sylvia and Owens, who were both holy head knight commanders, could only stand on the roof of the temple and watch the show, it was naturally because Varen and the other higher-ups did not trust them. Reiser did not reject this order. On the contrary, he was a little eager to give it a try. The reason for this was because of Sylvia. There was a rumor in the temple that Reiser's holy head commander title was placed in front of Shuiyan because the quadrennial ranking battle had not yet begun. Otherwise, the title would have been transferred to Shuiyan a long time ago. Later on, there was a rumor that Reiser had lost to Sylvia in a private battle, which further proved this point. Reiser did not deny this. They had fought in private, and it was true that he had lost to Xiao Weian. However, Reiser was not convinced because he felt that it was not a battle of life and death. He could not use some of his trump cards, which greatly reduced his combat strength. Moreover, in the past 2 years, his strength had improved a lot, and he was more confident in himself. In fact, Reiser was also waiting for the start of the ranking battle. This was the best opportunity for him to prove himself. Unfortunately, it would still take more than half a year, so he could only restrain himself and wait. But later, he suddenly realized that in addition to this, he actually had a chance to prove himself, and that was to kill Tang En. The news that Sylvia had chased Tang En for several months to no avail was well known in the Divine Hall. If he could kill Tang En, wouldn't that prove that he was stronger than Sylvia? It was a very simple logic. Reiser was tempted, so when he heard that Bishop Byron and the other bishops were looking for trouble with Tang En, he volunteered without hesitation and led a team to destroy a former bounty hunter branch. Then he found a secluded spot and waited for Tang En to arrive. Unfortunately, something came up at the last minute and he was transferred back. Not long after he returned, he learned that Tang En had found the hidden location and killed his subordinates. At that time, Reiser was filled with regret, lamenting that he had missed the perfect opportunity. Fortunately, he did not regret it for too long. Now he had another chance. Tang En was going to the Divine Hall in person. Ever since he learned of this news, Reiser had carefully analyzed Tang En's movements. Then, he volunteered again to guard the northern outskirts of Holy Light City, where Tang En was most likely to appear. However, after waiting for almost half a day, Reiser was a little disappointed. Tang En did not come. Instead, it was just these ordinary worshippers. Lord Paladin, there's a problem with their carriage. They need some help? Sigh, not again. Reiser sighed and waved his hand dispiritedly. He was about to agree to his subordinate's suggestion. However, at this moment, Lord Paladin, you're a holy head paladin commander too? Reiser looked up instinctively and saw the worshipper with a full beard looking at him from a few feet away. The worshipper smiled and said, "What a coincidence. I happen to know a holy head paladin commander too. His name is Reiser. Do you know him?" Who? Reiser was taken aback. Me? But, do I know this person? If you know him, can I trouble you to inform him? We're from the same hometown. We're very close. The surrounding knights could not help but look at Reiser with a strange expression. Very close? Don't you know that the person standing in front of you is Lord Reiser? Reiser could not help but frown slightly when he heard this. He was sure that he did not know these two people from the same hometown. Could it be that they were here to make connections? Just as he was about to question them, the bearded man's tone suddenly changed. He sighed and said, "You really are Razor. I bumped into you as soon as I arrived. It seems like Lady Luck hasn't completely abandoned me." Tang did not have a specific goal for this trip to the Northern Temple. His principle was to strike as hard as he could. However, just as he had mentioned to the old butler, there was another person he had to kill. That was Razor. This was to avenge Hand, a member of the Gray Space's first batch. However, Tang did not know Razor. Although he had seen his portrait through the powerful intelligence-gathering ability of the secret organization, there was still a difference between a portrait and a real person. Therefore, when Tang heard that there was a knight captain here and sized up Razor, he was still uncertain. Of course, after seeing the expressions of these knights, he was certain. "Who are you?" Razor also noticed that something was amiss. "TSK, since we're so fated, let me introduce you." Taking off his wide-brimmed hat, Tang smirked and said, "I am—" Before he could finish his sentence, suddenly, "Be careful. Be careful." A sharp cry came from the city and echoed in the air. This is Sylvia's voice? Be careful? Be careful of what? Razor was stunned when he heard that. Tang narrowed his eyes and looked up at the familiar figure on the distant roof. He pursed his lips and said, "This wastrel." He shook his head and waved his hand. With a whoosh, the wide-brimmed hat spun rapidly and instantly crossed a distance of several meters to arrive in front of Razor. Although it was just an ordinary hat, when Razor came back to his senses, he felt a sharp gust of wind coming at him like a knife. He roared in shock and raised his spear in an attempt to break the spinning wide-brimmed hat. Unfortunately, Razor, whose vision was blocked, did not notice that the middle-aged man beside him shook his head slightly. There was a sigh in his eyes, as if he was looking at a dying man. "Do you know?" Before the spear hit the wide-brimmed hat, a faint voice suddenly came from behind Razor. "I've been looking for you for a long time." "Huh?" Razor was shocked when he heard that. He instinctively wanted to pull back his spear and counterattack, but at that moment his shoulder armor was grabbed by two palms that appeared out of nowhere. His body suddenly became light, and he involuntarily leaped off the horse's back and soared into the sky. At this moment, "Sir, be careful." The warning came late, and the surrounding light knights turned pale with fright. In fact, they did not know when the other party had rushed over. They only saw that person suddenly appear behind Razor, and then the two figures soared into the sky. There was no chance for them to rescue him. Looking up, the two figures spun rapidly in the sky, and it was impossible to tell who was who. Then, with a deafening roar, a holy combat aura erupted. This naturally came from Razor. However, before these knights could relax, the roar was suddenly cut off. It was as if someone had suddenly grabbed his throat, and it turned into gurgling, yelling, and other inexplicable panting sounds. The next moment, the holy combat aura was still there, but the two figures that had leaped a few feet into the sky and reached the top suddenly fell down. With a bang, their figures merged and separated. One of the figures seemed to have been kicked down. He quickly landed on the ground and staggered back more than 10 steps. He swung his spear backward to stabilize himself. It was Razor. At this moment, his eyes were wide open, and his face was full of shock as if he had seen something extremely unbelievable. The holy combat aura around his body was still there, but if there was anyone with eyes, they would be able to see that this combat aura was rapidly dissipating. He slowly stretched out his left hand and pointed at the warhorse he had been riding on. He wanted to say something, but no sound came out of his mouth. Amidst the hissing sound of the wind, blood suddenly spurted out from the gap in the armor around his neck. At this moment, the other figure landed lightly on the horse's back. He casually reached out and grabbed the wide-brimmed hat that happened to be spinning toward him. He put it on his head and shrugged. "Damn it, I completed my goal in one go. What should I do now that I have nothing else to pursue?" Chapter 875. Life was like a box of chocolates. You would never know what you would get next. Perhaps it would be something delicious that suited your taste, like Tangen. His actions of sticking on his beard, wearing a hat, and so on were just to increase the chances of a successful assassination. It was fine to say that it was a waste of effort and effort. but in the end, it gave him more. As soon as he got off the carriage, he bumped into the target that he could not find for the past few months, of course. There were also those who had a bitter taste in their mouths, like Razor. He had a chest full of ambition and a burning desire to fight. But he did not expect that under such an inexplicable situation, a simple face-to-face encounter, my lord, looking at the blood spurting out from Razor's neck through the gap in his armor, the light knight at the side was completely dumbfounded. This was a holy grand knight who was like a god of war. How could he be injured so easily? Yes, it was only an injury. This was the truth that the knights could accept to a large extent. However, in the next moment, a whirlwind suddenly swept across the flat ground. Razor's half-raised arm fell down, his head lowered, and his majestic body collapsed like a golden mountain or a jade pillar. With a loud bang, dust and dirt flew into the air. My lord! The surrounding knights screamed and rushed over. Wu Ding, who was not far away, sighed softly when he saw this. Razor's strength was not weak, and he should not have been so easily slashed by Tang Yin. It was only because he was too careless and was caught off guard that he allowed Tang Yin to get close to him in an instant. Once Tang Yin got close to him, the result was basically set in stone. Damn it, what should I do now that I have no more goals to pursue after completing this trip? Shaking his head, Wu Ding looked up at Tang Yin, who was on horseback, and replied, when it comes to pursuing goals other than setting them yourself, sometimes outsiders will also help you push them forward. Tang Yin raised his eyebrows and turned his head to look at the large group of knights that were swarming towards them from the distant town. Then he looked up and saw several figures quickly rising from the temple. Among them, there were mages holding shields and masters of combat power who rose into the air with their hands behind their backs. Tang Yin could not help but click his tongue. TSK, that makes sense. This was indeed the case. Now was not the time for Tang Yin to be particular about his target, but the alert people of the Divine Hall had made him their target. My lord, the knights cried out in grief. When they saw Razor's exposed throat bone, they knew that there was no hope for him. They immediately raised their heads in grief and indignation and pointed their spears at Tang Yin. Kill him to avenge my lord. Kill! Amidst the deafening battle cries, several knights around him swiftly stepped forward and thrust their spears forward. Tang Yin did not seem to notice. He only looked at Wu Ding, who was holding the domineering golden-ringed saber without any intention of helping. He could not help but grin. He kicked the horse's back and took a few steps in the air. In an instant, he was above the heads of the knights who were besieging him. After landing on the ground, he rushed towards Light. Saint Tang Yin knew that Wu Ding would not take the initiative to help him kill. At best, he would play the role of a golden bodyguard. Unless it was a critical moment, he would definitely not help him. So now, everything depended on him. Thump, thump, thump. The horse's hooves sounded like thunder. It was only a short distance of more than 100 feet. When Tang Yin rushed to the front of the Knights of Light, the figures in the sky had also arrived. However, no matter if they were mages or masters of combat power, none of them chose to stop him immediately. Obviously, the masters of the Divine Hall were aware of Tang Yin's ghostly movements and insane speed. They knew that if they acted rashly, it would only be a waste of energy. They would not be able to cause any harm to Tang Yin at all. So, they were waiting for the moment when Tang Yin was trapped before making a move. However, could these ordinary knights who were running all over the mountains and plains trap Tang Yin? No. In fact, they could not even stop him. They could only see a sudden blur in front of their eyes and hear a sharp whistle. Then, before the first knight could thrust his spear forward at high speed, Tang Yin's figure, who was close at hand, disappeared in front of him. In the rumbling sound of horse hooves, dust flew up. The masters of the Divine Hall in the sky were also stunned. After looking around, they found that Tang Yin had already rushed to the center of the cavalry. Jump, move, turn, dodge. Among the war horses, Tang Yin took advantage of the gaps as if he was walking on flat ground. His speed did not decrease, as if he was not affected at all. Seeing this, The masters of the divine hall looked at each other and could not help but be surprised. The significance of this skill was not great, because the masters did not need to care about being surrounded and resisted by ordinary warriors. But at the same time, the significance of this skill was not small, because if their identities were changed, they would not be able to do it so easily. With a slash of a sword, it was more like using fighting energy to open a path. At this time, the masters really understood why the higher-ups of the Divine Hall repeatedly reminded them not to act rashly. This kind of movement speed was indeed abnormal. In the midst of their size, the masters could not help but subconsciously ignore another person. When Tang In rushed out of the cavalry, they were surprised to find a middle-aged man with a simple face and a golden-ringed saber in his hand. He also calmly walked out of the cavalry charging formation. "En? Who is this?" In the air, a warrior, standing with his hands behind his back, asked in surprise. They looked at each other and finally shook their heads blankly. Not to mention that with the vision of the Divine Hall, Tang In could enter their field of vision because he had made too much noise. So, there was no need to mention the disguised Wu Ding. After a brief observation, the masters could not help but look slightly surprised, because they found that they could not see through this person. Whether it was his identity, name, strength, or so on, they were all strange like a blank piece of paper. But they were only slightly surprised. They also could not see through Tang In's strength. Now that such a person had appeared, it did not seem to be surprising. The master of fighting energy who stood with his hands behind his back waved his hand to a few magicians who were holding shields and made an inviting gesture. He calmly said, "Let's begin." Nodding slightly, the few old mages raised their staffs in unison. Their lips moved slightly, letting out a low moan that sounded like mosquitoes dancing in the air. After a few breaths, they waved their staffs at Twain's rapidly charging figure from various angles. On the ground, Tang In suddenly raised his head and squinted at a pale white ring that looked like a fog circle in the early morning. It suddenly appeared out of thin air and instantly enveloped the surrounding area of a few hundred feet. Then, magic strips fell from the sky and connected head to tail. Not far above Tang In's head, they formed a somewhat mysterious and simple rune that rotated and flashed, echoing with the fog circle outside. It was like a large, suspended array that was about to be activated. At the same time, Tang In's feet suddenly stopped, and his galloping figure stopped. He didn't do this on his own accord. Instead, there was an indescribable and strange force that was forcefully holding him in place. A few steps away, Wu Ding looked up at the mysterious rotating magic runes in the sky and said with a chuckle, "Confinement Array. Oh, I haven't seen it for many years." Confinement Array? What's that? Feeling the parts of his body gradually stiffening and losing control, Tang In raised his eyebrows and looked at the few warriors who slowly descended from the sky in the distance. He could not help but come to a realization. It seemed that the other party really held a deep grudge against him for the commotion he caused when he entered the temple last time. This time, they planned to directly cast a spell to kill him outside. It's a magic array that has been passed down from ancient times. At that time, it was called the Battle of the Forbidden Gods. It was claimed to be able to immobilize the omnipotent gods. But after it fell into the hands of the temple, the name naturally changed. Wu Ding's expression was indifferent. He even had the time to talk about the history of this spell, and took the opportunity to mock the Temple of Light a little. But Tang In was not so calm. Forbidden gods? F***CK. So awesome? That's what the legends say. But you also know that the older something is, the harder it is to pass it down completely. Well, this is just an incomplete magic array. Wu Ding waved his hand and continued. But although it's incomplete, it is also claimed to be able to immobilize all tangible things. Of course, it also depends on the abilities of these magicians. In just a few words, he pointed out the weakness of this incomplete magic array. That was, the power that this magic array could exert depended on the strength of these magicians. Well, at least from the looks of it now, this magic array could not immobilize Wu Ding. Of course, that was Wu Ding. not Tang Yin. Although Tang Yin did not feel that this magic array could completely immobilize him, it should still be able to delay him. However, Tang Yin did not want to waste time and effort to find a way to crack it before even entering the city gate. Or if he had to fight, how embarrassing would that be? Thinking of this, he decisively turned his head to look at his bodyguard. Then what are you waiting for? Elder Liu, please make a move to break this eyesore. After a few days of contact, Wu Ding also had a general understanding of Tang Yin's shamelessness. He chuckled a few times and did not intend to make a move. Little Tang, since you have stepped into the space domain, then even if you can't break this magic array, there should be a way to avoid it. Obviously, Wu Ding wanted to let Tang and find a way by himself. He should also have some thoughts of testing him. Well, the old man who likes to teach others loves this. Curling his lips, Tang Yin helplessly spread out his hands. Elder Liu, you are not a competent bodyguard. Oh, why do you say that? You're not in any danger for the time being, right? You also know that this is temporary. With a sigh, Tang Yin knew that he could not count on Wu Ding. He looked up at the 3 combat Qi martial artists flying over. From the looks of their power, they should have just stepped into the threshold of void level. Of course, this lineup was not low. Only the temple had the resources to throw out 3 void-level powerhouses at one time to lead the way. But it was actually quite unfair. If these people came down to the ground and fought one-on-one, Tang Yin could easily deal with them. But in the air, even if it was just a small fry brought up by a void-level martial artist, he could only watch for the time being. So King Melancholy. Shaking his head, he collected his thoughts. Tang Yin's eyes turned, and his long eyebrows suddenly moved. He looked at the calm Wu Ding on the side. You just said that this magic array can freeze all tangible things? Wu Ding nodded with some confusion. With a laugh, Tang Yin seemed to think of something and shrugged easily. I'm not good at making cheats, but I'm best at finding bugs. After saying such a sentence that made Wu Ding even more confused, Tang Yin closed his eyes and raised his hands high, like a pretentious criminal who climbed to the top of the mountain to feel the surging wind. But at this time, Wu Ding's eyes suddenly fluctuated slightly, narrowing his eyes, and his expression became solemn. For some reason, he suddenly felt that the Tang Yin in front of him was a bit fake, as if there was a layer of vague crystal glass. No, it was a bit ethereal, as if it could be blown away by the wind in the next moment. Before Wu Ding could figure out what was going on, the surrounding environment suddenly lit up. Looking up, a void-level martial artist took the lead to attack. A thick column of holy spear light fell from the sky, and in a short moment, it easily passed through the mysterious patterns above and pressed down like thunder. Bang! A huge explosion resounded. Dough glows swept out in all directions, and waves of air rolled out. The flat ground was instantly replaced by a huge scorched earth pit that was a few meters wide. What was even more strange was that the large and small pieces of earth around the explosion did not fall down, but floated quietly in the air as if someone had pressed the pause button on the scene. Needless to say, this was naturally because of the confinement array. The pieces of earth were also tangible things, so they were naturally fixed in place after flying up. Perhaps it was because of this that this domineering spear light did not fully erupt with the power it should have. But even so, if someone stood in the original scorched earth pit, they would definitely be blown to pieces. But this was not the case because there was no dust splashing. The void-level martial artist who shot the spear light quickly glanced around, and his eyes immediately bulged out as he froze in the air. Tang Yin was not dead, and at this time, he was no longer in the confinement array, but was approaching the distant Holy Light City. This array could not restrain him, and the middle-aged man, with a simple face, was also next to him. Although he looked a little confused, looking at his calm posture, it was obvious that he was not affected at all. What was going on? Seeing this, the Doqi master subconsciously raised his head and looked at the magicians with red faces above him in confusion. The latter's expression was also shocked with helplessness and doubt. They did not know what had happened. The array was still there, but it could not restrain the person. For a time, the scene was a little strange. At this time, Wu Ding asked the question that was in the hearts of everyone present. What kind of movement skill is this? He was the closest, so he could naturally see that Tang En's state was a little strange. His face, figure, and actions were clearly right before his eyes, yet they didn't seem so clear. They were blurry and indistinct like a wisp of an afterimage, and they were illusory and unreal like flowers in a mirror or the moon in water. Tang En did not hide and grinned. How is it? Shadow, invisibility, proficient. Invisibility, wandering in the shadows. Yes, Tang En was using the shadow invisibility skill in the system skill tree. This skill had previously stalled Tang En for a long time, but after he gradually stepped into the void level, his understanding of this skill also improved day by day. Now, he had pushed it to the proficient level in one fell swoop. In fact, to put it bluntly, the effect of this skill was to walk in the gap between the real world and the parallel space. If it was in the real world, then this skill naturally could not be used. If it was in the parallel space, then Tang En would enter an endless space tunnel, floating and wandering. With his current understanding of the space domain, it would be difficult for him to come out again. If it was not in the parallel space, then to some extent, it meant that Tang En was basically out of the real world. Of course, this was only the basic. If he was attacked, he would still be beaten out. But if he was not disturbed, the so-called invisibility in the skill introduction allowed him to transform into something invisible. In this way, this confinement array, which claimed to be able to restrain all tangible substances, naturally could not do anything to him. There was no other way. He was now walking the invisible path. It was none of your business. Shadow, invisibility, it really is like a shadow. Good movement skill. Wu Ding nodded, and there was undisguised praise in his words. He did not make a move just now, because he wanted to test Yishiwen. But what he wanted to see was how Tang En would deal with the enemy in the air. He did not expect that Tang En would be able to do it in one step and simply ignore the confinement array. Well, this was also a gain. At least he knew that he had another unexpected ability. It's just a small trick. It's not worthy of Elder Lu's praise. Beaming with joy, Tang En continued to use his unique modesty to be polite. Then his figure flashed, and he left the shadow state and returned to the real world. At the same time, his speed increased a little, and he instantly rushed to Holy Light City. The shadow invisibility skill was good, but it always made Tang En a little worried. He was afraid that if he took a wrong step, he would directly enter the parallel space and never come back. So he was extremely careful when he ran before, which naturally caused him to reduce his speed. Pausing for a moment, Tang En looked at the faintly discernible figures in the residential houses of Holy Light City. He turned his head and said, "Elder Lu, this time you have to be more careful. My life is in your hands." With the huge power of the Temple of Light, it was naturally impossible for there to only be a few masters chasing in the air behind them. Perhaps there were not many people who could step into the threshold of void level, but of course there were many Earth level high rank, and even peak Earth level martial artists. These powerhouses could not fly, so they hid in front of a fine encirclement in Holy Light City, waiting for Tang En to take the initiative to crash into it. It could be said that these people were more difficult to deal with than the void level martial artists behind them. Wu Ding dragged the gold-threaded ringed saber with a calm expression. "I told you, no one can hurt you. Let's go, it's time to go in." As mentioned before, Holy Light City was not fortified, and there were no high and thick walls like ordinary cities. This made it easier for Tang En to move. His figure flickered, and he instantly broke in a Holy Light City. But before he could take a few steps, he suddenly shouted, "Die!" A figure suddenly rushed out from the narrow alley beside the narrow street. The man and the spear became one, stabbing towards Tang En in the middle of the street. This surprise attack could be said to be sudden, but facing Tang En, who was an expert in sneak attacks, it was undoubtedly not enough. With a slight step, he easily avoided the tip of the spear as if he could predict the future. Then he stretched out his hand and kicked, snatching the spear and kicking the person in one go. With a bang, the figure who had not yet revealed his appearance flew back to where he came from, widening the width of the narrow alley. After doing all this, Tang-in did not look at the result of that person. He suddenly stepped forward, swung his arm, and roared. With a whoosh, the spear whistled through the air and flew quickly towards the headquarters of the temple in the distance. Then, arrogant laughter spread far and wide. "Ha, I'm back again. Wait for me. Wait for me to tear down your broken temple." Chapter 876. P.S. Nonsense doesn't count. Well, sorry it's late again. For some reason, Raccoon has been a little uneasy these days. Haha. Frankly speaking, Raccoon seniority was upgraded this afternoon. My sister-in-law gave birth to a daughter of 7 kilograms and 8 tails, who is Raccoon's little niece. TSK, it feels so complicated. Anyway, congratulations to Raccoon. Carrot, I'm back again. Wait for me. Wait for me to tear down your stupid temple. His arrogant laughter rumbled. After that, a spear suddenly shot up into the sky from Holy Light City. It seemed as if it was piercing through the clouds, and it drew a beautiful and overbearing arc in the sky as it descended rapidly. It passed through the densely packed city area, passed through the countless deities Templar martial artists that were charging over one after another, and also passed through Xiao Weian and Owen's line of sight. With a loud bang, it was nailed diagonally to the center of the temple, on the large square in front of the main hall. In an instant, the bluestone floor within a 3-meter radius shattered, leaving only the short handle of the spear outside. It was like a tree nailed to the Gobi Desert. Although its neck had been twisted in the biting wind and sand, its roots were still firmly rooted in place. No matter how vast the sea was, it would not move an inch. Below the main hall, a row of high-ranking temple officials dressed in red robes were stunned when they saw this. When they heard the arrogant voice coming from afar, they could not help but look at each other with ugly expressions. This was the headquarters of the temple with 1,000 years of history. When had they ever been humiliated like this? In an instant, ignorant fool, arrogant child, evil heretic, he must be purified. He must receive the strongest punishment of God. In the middle of the crowd, Varen was quite shrewd. He did not say anything, but the corner of his eyes twitched. He waved his hand expressionlessly and said, "Find him, surround him, and kill him." Yes. Varen gave the order very straightforwardly. Sylvia, who was on the roof of a side hall not far away, glanced from afar, and a look of disdain flashed across her face. Moving the battlefield to such a complicated environment is really extremely stupid. Holy Light City wasn't a city in the ordinary sense. Those tall, short, and densely packed buildings were all built by the believers on their own, and no planning had been carried out. As such, Holy Light City naturally wasn't very orderly, but because of the atmosphere here, it seemed to be very harmonious and peaceful. However, this couldn't cover up the fact that the overall layout of Vatican City was very, 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 very messy. Such an environment was undoubtedly Tang-in's favorite. It was no exaggeration to say that the difficulty of stopping him here was comparable to finding a needle in a haystack. There was basically no chance of success. Sylvia was naturally well aware of this. It was also mentioned in detail in the proposal she had handed to Varen. However, judging for the current situation, it was clear that the other party didn't take it seriously, or rather, didn't even look at it. It was simply stupid to the extreme. However, Owens looked at the fallen Reiser in the distance and the flustered and exasperated powerhouses in the sky. He took a deep breath and shook his head with a complicated expression. He obviously had a different opinion. Be thankful for their stupidity, or else. Hiss. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he sucked in a breath of cold air. His face was full of joy. I don't want to be sent to encircle and annihilate that Tang-in. I'm obviously going to be cannon fodder. These words were unpleasant to the ears. If Varen and the others heard them, they would definitely be labeled as shaking the morale of the army before the battle. However, it was also the truth right now. Tang-in felt very comfortable now. It was as comfortable as if someone had given him a pillow when he was dozing off. Rows upon rows of buildings, uneven eaves, narrow and crooked alleys, as well as streets that curved as far as the eye could see. Tang In simply loved this place to death. He walked around freely with his arms wide open. It was as if even the air he breathed had a sense of freedom and comfort. At this moment, here, a figure holding a spear suddenly appeared at the corner of the street in front of him. He looked around vigilantly and immediately saw Tang Un's strange posture of hugging the air. He was stunned for a moment before he shouted a warning. At the same time, his figure rushed over like an arrow from a bow. Tang did not get angry because his mood was disturbed. With a bang, he crashed into the window of a shop beside him without looking back. The next moment, the Earthrang powerhouse who was rushing over from the back of the shop suddenly stopped and turned around in shock. Boom! The stone wall beside him exploded. Gravel and dust instantly enveloped him. Before he could react in time, he suddenly felt a heavy step on his head. He immediately crashed into the ground and was completely buried by the bricks and stones that covered him. As soon as he was done, it's him. Surround him. Another 3 powerhouses from the Temple of God rushed over and blocked Tang Un's path. The two sides met and paused for a moment. Holy fighting aura soared into the sky. Tang Un acted as if he did not see it. He did not slow down and rushed over with a faint smile on his face. When the two sides were within 5 feet of each other, die! He waved his spear and roared. 3 spear lights rushed out side by side like 3 galloping horses, covering every inch of space in this narrow street. As the spear lights rolled over, the stone slabs on the ground lifted by themselves. The glass of the surrounding shops and houses exploded. The street within 5 feet seemed to have been ravaged by a tornado, with all kinds of debris flying in the air. But just as the 3 spear lights converged at one point and accurately hit Tang In, who was rushing over. With a light tap of his feet, Tang In suddenly jumped up and pressed on a protruding balcony in midair. Boom! A violent explosion came from under his feet. Billowing waves of air rushed up to the sky. As if borrowing this force, Tang In's figure rose again and easily jumped onto the roof of a 3-story attic. He turned halfway and swept his leg. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The bluestone tiles of the roof flew out like a complete water curtain, covering the 3 powerhouses of the Temple of God in the air. Damn it! With a loud bang, layers of spear shadows were waved and rolled. The bluestone tiles were instantly torn apart and shot out. But it was too late. When the 3 powerhouses of the Temple of God rushed out of the dusty area, there was no trace of him on the bare roof. Frowning, they looked around. Here! A violent roar suddenly came from the other side of the pointed roof. The 3 powerhouses of the Temple of God heard the roar and quickly rushed forward. They saw a person running wildly on the street below, rushing to a broken window of a house. This person was the powerhouse of the Temple of God who first discovered Tang Un. Taking advantage of the entanglement just now, he rushed over without stopping for a moment, just in time to see Tang and repeat the same trick, breaking the window again and sneaking into the house on the street. Without hesitation, following the path taken by Tang In, the powerhouse of the Temple of God lowered his body and quickly jumped into the broken window. Seeing this, the 3 people on the roof stepped forward and were about to chase down. But the next moment, with a long and angry roar, the figure who had just jumped into the window suddenly bent down and retreated at a speed faster than when he came. Well, if they guessed correctly, he was kicked out. Immediately, with a bang, he crashed into a shop on the opposite side of the street. There was a loud crash, and it was obvious that he had smashed many things inside. It was really embarrassing. Stunned, the 3 of them looked at each other, unable to hide the shock and bitterness on their faces. What? No way. In any case, they were still 5 Earth-grade experts. Even if their strength was not good, but after chasing for a while before they could even fight, they were easily played in the palm of his hand. This was a little too exaggerated, wasn't it? In fact, it was not exaggerated at all, because it was not only them. A moment later, the same scene played out one after another in Holy Light City, It had to be said that it was indeed a stupid decision for Varen and the others to choose this place as the location of the battle. In the alleys, behind the stone walls, between the unlatched wooden doors, and even the slightly larger signboards of the shops, they all became Tang Un's hiding spots. The more he fought, the more he got used to it, and the more excited Tang Un became. He crazily showed off all kinds of hidden means and assassination techniques. For a moment, Tang Un was even somewhat addicted to the pleasure of being in complete control. In this complex environment, he was no longer the prey to be encircled, nor was he the hunter waiting for an opportunity. He was the king of this land, the king who determined the life and death of people, controlled everything, and did whatever he wanted. Compared to the crazy Tang Un, the powerhouses of the Temple of God who had gathered together were much more miserable. At this time, they had long lost the previous easygoing mentality. They trembled with fear as if they were treading on thin ice. When they turned their heads and looked around, the familiar holy light city in front of them seemed to have suddenly become extremely strange as a hunting ground. Of course, they were not the hunters. They were just the poor prey that had been robbed. However, prey also had dignity. So after a while, when they saw that they and their companions had fallen into a trap and were in imminent danger, yet Twain only injured them and did not kill them. He even completely turned a blind eye to some opportunities that could have ended their lives with just a light swing of his blade. Everyone was furious. In their eyes, Twain was blatantly humiliating them. His goal was to strike them down again and again. His intentions were truly deserving of death. Originally, naturally, no one would be bored enough to want to try death. However, there were always some people who felt that some things were more important than death, such as dignity, glory, and so on. And Tang Un's actions were undoubtedly throwing their dignity and glory to the ground. He jumped up and stomped on them again and again. Suddenly, the situation began to get a little out of control. The powerhouses who could not find Tang Un for a long time had completely lost their patience to search for him. Instead, they constantly unleashed their Do Chi and forcefully destroyed the obstructive buildings, alleys, narrow streets, and so on in front of them. Their thoughts at this time were very simple. Wasn't Tang Un very good at hiding? Then they would flatten this complex environment and see where else could he hide. It had to be said that purely from a tactical point of view, this was indeed a good strategy. But from a practical point of view, the believers standing on the shore of the distant river were completely furious. Of course, anyone who saw their warm home destroyed into a mess of ruins would be unable to hold back their anger. What's more, it was not some evil heretic who did this, but the clergy of the temple that they usually believed in. F***ck. This is crazy. Completely crazy. Looking at the chaotic and crazy scene in front of him, Owens grabbed his hair and muttered unconsciously in a low voice. His face was full of confusion and helplessness. "Bastards, what are you doing?" Clenching her fists tightly, Sylvia leaned forward and tensed up. She wished she could immediately rush over and stop this stupid action. But unfortunately, because of Varen's distrust, they could not stop it at all. They could only watch in shock and anger. And the source of all this, Tang Un, was indulging in the thrill of assassination and was completely unaware of what was happening outside because of him. Yes, he was indeed unaware. He did not intend to humiliate those warriors. If it were any other time, he would be eager to kill as many of these people as possible. After all, they were also masters of the temple, and killing them would be a great supplement to his blood and chi value. But it was different now. He, who was indulging in the thrill of assassination, had even forgotten to kill. He simply thought that if he killed these people, no one would continue to play this game with him. Well, that was all. And so, a not very beautiful misunderstanding was born. In front of the main hall, listening to the constant rumbling of explosions outside, Varen and the others were very happy at first and nodded with satisfaction. They thought to themselves, "This is good. This means that Tang Un is besieged by countless masters here. The result should be out soon." With this beautiful vision in mind, they waited for more than 10 minutes, only to see a panting knight. "Ha, how is it? Is the result out? Where's Tang In? Oh, Tang In's corpse." "Corpse? No, sir." "Huff. Sir, those believers are coming from the other side of the river, Huff. We can't hold them off any longer." "Believers coming over?" Varen was stunned for a moment, then frowned and waved his hand. "Isn't this nonsense? Tell them that it's dangerous here and they can't come over for the time being." No, but you say it like that." "But they said—" After hesitating for a moment, the knight gritted his teeth and said, "Their houses were demolished." "Oh, about that." One of the higher-ups took over and waved his hand very gracefully. "It's okay. Just tell them that this is the price they must pay for eradicating evil heretics. If their houses are damaged, the temple will help them restore them to their original state after this matter is resolved. Well, we have to take the overall situation into consideration. But it's our people who demolished their houses, and it seems like they did it on purpose." Before he finished speaking, there was a rumble. Everyone subconsciously looked up and saw dust and ashes suddenly rising from the city several miles away. They couldn't help but be stunned. Weren't there only two opponents? What was going on? That Tang In wasn't surrounded, but our people are constantly demolishing the city. When he finished speaking, there was dead silence in front of the main hall. After a moment, Varen looked at the somewhat uneasy knight in front of him and frowned. "Are you kidding?" Of course, this was not a joke. Although it sounded incredible, as if a group of experts of the temple had suddenly gone crazy, this was the current situation. Varen couldn't understand the situation, and even Wu Ding felt that it was a little too much. Standing on the roof of a rare 3-story attic, looking at the chaotic scene of dust and smoke, he shook his head and said, Little Tang. Like a shout, his peaceful voice slowly echoed over the entire city. It couldn't be helped. It was a little embarrassing. In such a complicated environment, Tang was like a fish in water. Not to mention the fact that the people of the temple couldn't determine his current location. Even Wu Ding had lost track of him long ago. Tang In, who was grabbing the head of a temple expert and slamming it against the wall, instantly woke up when he heard this. However, although he had recovered, he naturally didn't understand the current situation. He just wondered why Wu Ding called him. Roar. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the dizzy expert of the temple finally had time to react. He suddenly reached out and grabbed Tang In's waist. The muscles of his arms twisted and swelled, tightly entangling him like a python. He hissed, Here! With a boom, a small section of the stone wall collapsed, and the shouting stopped abruptly. Tang In expressionlessly let go of the hair in his hand. With a click, the fainted expert of the temple fell to the ground. His powerless arms hung on Tang In's calf, looking very unwilling. Looking left and right, Tang In stepped on the collapsed wall and leaped onto the roof of a bungalow not far away. Although it was only one floor, looking into the distance, Tang In was startled by the billowing dust over the entire city. He scratched his head in astonishment. All of this was done by me. No, but you can say that. When Tang In revealed himself, Wu Ding moved over immediately. Looking at Tang In's confused look, he couldn't help but feel a little emotional. I still couldn't figure it out before. Although there is a fighting energy channel in your body, it's really incredible that your actions alone can make the temple so awkward and passive. But now, I think I understand a little. Shaking his head slightly, he added in his heart, You are simply the king of destruction. Oh, what's going on? The more Tang In listened, the more confused he became. Forget it. Let's go directly to the temple. Waving his hand, Wu Ding had no intention to explain more and was a little dispirited. Originally, Wu Ding was a little expectant when he saw the temple bring out so many experts at once. He thought that even if these people couldn't kill Tang In, they would definitely cause him a lot of trouble. Maybe he could take the opportunity to see what new martial skills or things Tang would display again. But he didn't expect that in the end, it would turn into a complete farce, and a one-sided one at that. It really made him feel surprised and a little disappointed. After saying this, Looking at the experts of the temple madly rushing over, Wu Ding didn't want to continue watching. He reached out and grabbed Tang and shoulder, opening the way with the golden thread ring blade. In just a short moment, they left the holy light city and went straight to the periphery of the temple. This was Wu Ding's way of traveling. Although he couldn't teleport like a space magician, nor did he have the speed of Tang En's body, he could still travel several miles in a breath with his body and sword, cutting through the void. In terms of distance, he was much faster than Tang En. Of course, there were guards here, but they were not experts, just ordinary knights of light. Seeing Tang En and the others arrive, they didn't foolishly attack, but pursed their lips and screamed, then obediently retreated. Seeing this, Twain raised his eyebrows and instinctively felt that something was wrong. Just as he was about to say something, a light curtain suddenly lit up in front of him and separated them to the left and right like a barrier, instantly separating them from the temple. Then, more than 100 shield-wielding magicians slowly floated up from the temple, waving their staffs in unison. Ancient hexagonal light panels appeared out of thin air, with various mysterious runes appearing on them. They rotated and combined, finally forming a semicircular light shield, completely enveloping the entire temple. It seemed that it was so solid and unbreakable. Startled, Tang En touched his nose and couldn't help but sigh. It really looks like a F** King tortoiseshell. Chapter 877. Boom, boom, boom. The sounds of explosions continued to reverberate in the distance, and a large cloud of dust that resembled a haze had completely covered the originally peaceful and harmonious city. From time to time, some thin iron shop signs could be seen, appearing and disappearing in the gray fog. Those were the warriors of the temple who had lost Tang En's trace once again. They could not stop the sullen and crazy thoughts in their hearts, and they were still venting their frustrations on the believers' homes. Of course, Tang En would no longer pay attention to those powerhouses who were like resentful wives. He was now looking up at the semicircular light shield above the temple and clicked his tongue in wonder. The weather was clear, and the sun was just right. Under the faint light, the semicircular light shield above the temple was even more dazzling. If one were to look carefully, one would discover that this semicircular light shield was not a single entity. Instead, it was pieced together by pieces of light plates that seemed to be solid barriers. Mysterious runes slowly wandered on it, and with the cracks and gullies between the light plates, it really did look like a huge tortoise shell. After a careful observation, Tang En grinned. Sure enough, they had a lot of tricks up their sleeves. He turned to ask Wu Ding, "Elder Lu, what kind of array is this?" Shaking his head, Wu Ding narrowed his eyes at the hundreds of magicians floating above the temple and said with a chuckle, "It's not an array this time, but a simple defensive magic shield. It seems that Lil Tang, you left a deep impression on him last time." The temple's magicians collectively came out to hold up a defensive shield. Hee, they clearly don't welcome you. What are you saying, Elder Lu? I'm not the only one who's being rejected. Pursing his lips, Tang En took a few steps forward and came to the semicircular light shield. He paused, narrowed his eyes, and slowly raised his hand to put it close to the shield. He did not have time to waste here. As soon as this dazzling light shield appeared, the powerhouses of the temple who were like headless flies in the city would definitely know that he was here. And if he was entangled here, it would be a real siege. However, just as Tang En's palm was about to reach the semicircular light shield, a cold and stern voice asked slowly, "Tang En?" Tang En rolled his eyes and saw a row of more than 10 white-haired figures dressed in red robes appear in the sky not far away. Most of them had their hands behind their backs and were looking down condescendingly. Their disdain was obvious. As for the person who passed on the message, it was the old man holding a crystal staff in the crowd. Although his long face was a little ugly, he was quite shrewd. He did not show a vile look at Tang En, the victim's family. "Oh, it's Varen." Wu Ding nodded in realization and identified the old man. Tang En raised his eyebrows. Hearing the name of the big shot sent by the temple headquarters to preside over the situation, He raised his head and sized Varen up. Then, he lowered his eyes and continued to study the semicircular light shield, doing whatever he needed to do. Although he did not say anything, his attitude infuriated the higher-ups of the temple headquarters. They had always been high and mighty. When had they ever been looked down upon like this? Arrogant, presumptuous. If such an evil heretic is not purified, it will be an insult to the gods. Varen's expression did not change. He waved his hand slightly to stop the furious curses of the people around him. He squinted at Tang In and said seriously, "You can't break this defensive barrier. Why don't you take this opportunity to talk about something else? For example, what you said in the letter earlier." Tang In did not even raise his head. "I'm not used to shouting at people from a distance, especially an old man. TSK, wait for me to go in. We can talk face to face." "Haha, I admire your confidence, although I don't know where it comes from." Varen shook his head and laughed. He did not hide the disapproving look on his face. "But, as I said, you can't break this barrier." As if to prove Varen's words, the semicircular light shield that was a few inches away from Tang In's palm suddenly seemed to be touched. The magic runes around it lit up, and invisible ripples spread out like water. Tang In's expression suddenly changed. The alarm in his heart suddenly rang loudly. He quickly retreated and was about to leave the range of the ripples without delay. However, his outstretched arm still felt as if it had been hit by a leather whip at high speed. He swung his arm away abruptly and felt a piercing pain. "Haha, shameless boasting. Come in and talk. Can a wretch like you come in now? Is this your so-called confidence?" "Ha!" Harsh taunts. It was not known if it was because of the recent awkward situation that they had suffered internal injuries or for some other reason, but these senior executives appear to be unusually unsettled. Especially after seeing the source of the disaster, Twain, embarrassed, they could not help but gloat. This defensive barrier has gathered all the strength and experience of the temple mages. It's not comparable to the confinement array. Not only can it prevent tangible substances from entering, but can also cut off space. Lil Tang, you really can't break this." Wu Ding could naturally see that Tang In's seemingly untouched attempt was actually using space techniques. Therefore, after seeing Tang In's failure, he gave a brief explanation. Tang In nodded lightly when he heard this. He did not look depressed. Not to mention the millennia of heritage of the temple. The temple mages, composed of more than 100 mages, were already an extremely luxurious lineup. It was normal that he could not break it. Picking his ears, Twain raised his head to look at the dozen or so upper echelons of the temples who were still cursing. He pursed his lips. "I once heard someone say that cursing was invented as a compromise between running away and fighting." "Haha, what are you afraid of?" "Afraid? We're afraid of you?" "Ha!" As if they had heard the funniest joke in the world, the dozen or so higher-ups were startled at first. Then, they threw their heads back and laughed in unison. Their expressions were different, and they looked extremely exaggerated and disdainful. Tang In smiled and said again, "Oh, there's one more thing. The more people lack something, the more they like to show it off. Similarly, when a person is afraid, his actions will be especially exaggerated and ridiculous." The mocking laughter suddenly deflated, like a rooster whose throat was suddenly pinched. The dozen or so higher-ups' old faces suddenly flushed red. They did not know whether to curse or laugh. After a pause, someone snorted coldly, "What a sharp tongue!" It seemed that he disdained to argue, but only he himself knew the throbbing in his heart. In the past few months, they were indeed afraid that this guy named Tang and would come out and cause trouble again. Tang In smiled when he saw this. He did not beat the dog when it was down, but he kept muttering in his heart, calling the old butler. "Can you hear me? Damn it, it's not easy. I've finally learned the basics of your poisonous tongue." Varen could not help but snort when he saw this. He really did not agree with the combat effectiveness of his companions. At the same time, he lost interest in continuing to pretend. His face turned cold, and he waved his hand fiercely. "That's enough, Tang In. That's it." Tang In interrupted directly and shook his head regretfully. "By the way, I still want to go in and have a good talk with you face to face." "Huh?" Varen was amused when he heard this. He shook his head disdainfully. Come in? With just you? What else can I do? With just them. Tang and pointed at the masters of the temple who were constantly gathering behind him and spread his hands. Don't blame me for being too frank. With just these dregs with only 5 combat effectiveness, if they want to kill me, they'll have to go back and cultivate for a few more decades. F***CK. The masters of the temple who had just rushed over in a daze from Holy Light City were once again implicated. Their faces could not help but turn ugly when they heard this. If it were not for the fact that Varen had not given the order, they would have already rushed over. Is that so? How about this? Varen curled his lips and sneered non-committally, waving his hand. Immediately, 3 burly figures quietly rose from the temple. 2 were old and 1 was middle-aged. All of them were expressionless and did not have any magic shields to protect them. They looked very ordinary. However, judging from the way they flew in the air and Varen's seemingly casual but serious manner, it was obvious that these 3 people were not ordinary. This is the retired masters of the Hall of Knights. They're here too. Owens opened his mouth and rubbed his panda eyes on the roof of the side hall. His face was full of shock. He then licked his dry lips. This time, Tang Yin, I'm afraid it's going to be difficult. The so-called retired masters of the Hall of Knights could only be the previous Holy Head Knight commanders. Old and frail, their actual combat effectiveness might not be as good as before. However, after retirement, they had plenty of time to slowly accumulate the experience of hundreds of battles in the first half of their lives and eventually evolve it into a higher realm. In this way, their combat effectiveness had actually improved. Sylvia on the side certainly understood this, but she did not pay attention to these seniors. Instead, she gripped the light spear in her hand tightly, her knuckles turning white. She stared at Tang Yin on the periphery with complicated emotions. As a clergyman, of course, she should support the temple. But now, seeing that Tang Yin was in danger, the balance in her heart could not help but sway left and right, and eventually slowly tilted. What are you waiting for? You wretched guy, you must have a backup plan, right? You must have one. Please, take it out, Tang, and did not know whether he was comforting himself or deceiving himself. He was grimacing at this time, as if he had a toothache. 3 genuine void-level warriors? Damn it. Although Tang Yin had long known that the temple had a deep foundation and was mentally prepared for this, when he really saw the temple throw out 3 genuine void-level warriors again, he could not help but be secretly shocked. What kind of father or godfather was this? That was weak, but they were directly using ancestral graves. They were not on the same level at all. Haha, heresy. Just wait for the punishment of the gods. My divine palace has existed for thousands of years. How can a clown like you shake it? Just wait for your death obediently. This time, Tang Yin did not pay attention to the higher-ups of the temple, who could not help but jump out again. He just narrowed his eyes and watched the 3 void-level warriors fly higher and higher, as if they were going to directly fly out of the semicircular light shield. Obviously, even with their strength, they could not directly attack Tang Yin on the periphery of the light shield. From his point of view, this semicircular light shield was indeed strange. But, withdrawing his gaze, Tang Yin sighed softly, took a step back, bowed, and waved his hand in an inviting gesture. You have been watching the show for so long. Shouldn't you also show your hand? This was naturally said to Wu Ding, but Wu Ding narrowed his eyes, looked up at the 3 void-level warriors, and said calmly, Wait a little longer. If we wait any longer, we will die. Are you sure? I'm sure. Okay. Wu Ding sighed, as if he was regretful. Withdrawing his gaze, he slowly raised the extremely domineering golden-ringed saber in his hand. Ding-ling-ling. In the breeze, the 8 golden rings gently knocked against the saber, producing crisp and fragmentary sounds. The scene was quiet. Haha, this is your trump card? A higher-up of the temple looked at Wu Ding in a daze, then looked at the golden-ringed saber exclusive to bandits and could not help laughing out loud. Extremely happy. This time, It was not an exaggeration to cover up his fear. Even the shrewd Varen could not help but shake his head and laugh, his face full of absurdity. A golden-ringed saber wanted to break the defensive barrier set up by the temple mages. Was this Tang Yin crazy, or was he crazy? Unlike the people inside the light shield, the expressions of the masters of the temple behind Tang Yin and Wu Ding suddenly froze. Their pupils contracted sharply, and they could not help but tremble slightly. Above the temple, the sun was just right, and the breeze was not noisy. It was a good weather for a walk. But at this time, the masters of the temple felt as if they were in a polar iceberg. Their bodies were cold to the bone, and they could not smell a trace of warmth. The focus of their vision, Wu Ding, who was holding the golden-ringed saber high, had long been blurred. In their eyes, it was as if they saw a sleeping ancient beast slowly wake up in the dark night, slowly opening its cruel and ruthless eyes. It was also as if they suddenly saw a huge dragon head silently poking out from the clouds in the sky, looking down on the world and all living beings, their bodies trembling, completely stiffened, their minds chaotic, completely blank. No one knew what was happening at this moment, except for Tang Yin. As the one closest to Wu Ding, the alarm bells in his heart had already gone numb. His eyes were fixed on the golden-ringed saber, and his long, narrow eyes almost narrowed into slits. There was obviously no trace of fighting aura, but Tang Yin, who was good at restraining his aura, still smelled a familiar scent from the saber. And not long ago in the secret agency of Hanshui City, he also smelled a similar scent. That was the scent of extreme danger. Many distracting thoughts only lasted for a moment. The higher-ups of the temple were still laughing. The 3 Void Grade Masters were still rising, and half of the old man's body had already stepped out of the light shield. At this moment, Wu Ding took a step forward and directly arrived in front of the semicircular light shield, waving his saber. "Ha, he really slashed, huh?" The mocking words suddenly came to a stop, and soon after, a bright light burst out. The semicircular light shield was like a wild cat that had seen a fierce tiger, and its hair instantly stood on end. It assumed its most powerful posture, like the dazzling sun that slowly rose from the east every morning. The mysterious runes on it also quickly swam, rushing to a certain area of the light shield in the north like a moth to a flame, trying to make up for something. However, it was already too late. No matter how ordinary the golden-ringed saber touched the semicircular light shield, there was no earth-shattering explosion. Tang Yin, who was standing not far away, only heard a slight chi sound, like a red-hot iron stick poking into ice water. After a pause, the front end of the golden-ringed saber easily pierced through the light shield, as if piercing through a layer of thin gauze. Then the golden ring, the blade, and another golden ring, puff. The moment the light shield was broken, the hundreds of magicians suspended in the air suddenly opened their mouths and spat out a large amount of blood mist. Their bodies swayed, and they stared blankly at the golden-ringed saber that easily cut through, their faces full of horror. Varen and the others were not high in the air, so when the blood mist drifted down with the wind, it just enveloped them. No one avoided it in disgust, and no one even blinked. They just stared blankly, their expressions completely frozen. What was going on? "Go in." Wu Ding followed the saber and stepped into the narrow passage that had been cut through. Tang Yin was slightly stunned when he heard the voice and subconsciously followed him in. Then he realized that he had entered just like that. This was his first reaction, followed by his second reaction. It was not even so easy to walk through his own door, was it? Did he have to be so casual? This was simply deceiving the audience. The thought flashed through his mind, and he regained his rationality. Tang Yin exhaled and instantly understood the key to Wu Ding's breaking of the light shield. It was simple to say, that was to break the surface with a single point. After all, the temple was composed of more than 100 high-level or grand magicians. With such a luxurious lineup, even Wu Ding would not be able to break through the defense barrier easily. However, the area of the northern temple was too large. In order to cover such a large area, the defense force had to be scattered. And this also gave Wu Ding an opportunity. He did not need to completely break the defensive barrier. He only needed to open a gap to enter, which was naturally much easier. Of course, this gap was not something that anyone could open. If it was not for Wu Ding's strength, even if he thought of a way, it would be in vain. However, no matter what method was used, Ting In and Wu Ding had already entered the range of the temple. This was an indisputable fact. Immediately afterward, a loud scream shook the sky. With a bang, Tang In subconsciously looked up and saw a cloud of blood mist completely explode above the brilliant light shield. It was the real void-grade cultivator who had stepped out of the light shield. He was unlucky. When Wu Ding attacked with a saber, he had just passed through the light shield. Originally, there should have been a weak safety passage above the light shield for them to go out and kill Tang In. But when the light shield met the golden silk ring's saber, it instantly erupted with all its power, and the void-grade cultivator caught in the middle naturally suffered. One had to know that this was not a game world. The magic here could not distinguish who was a teammate, who was the enemy. Anyone who entered the attack range at this time would be absolutely disregarded. However, was this really just luck? Tang In remembered the look of regret on Wu Ding's face before he attacked, and then looked at the other two void-grade cultivators flying at the same height not far from the light shield. How could he not understand? Wu Ding wanted to let go of the unlucky void-grade cultivator, maximizing the benefits, and then eliminate the other two in one fell swoop. Although Wu Ding did not take the initiative to help him kill people before, this was the other party's magic backfiring on itself. So naturally, he could not be blamed. Scratching his head, Tang In remembered that he had firmly said, "I'm sure," just now, and could not help but feel bitter. Fuck, can't you just say everything in one go? Isn't this cheating? Going straight up, not even looking at Tang In outside, he flew higher and higher. Chapter 878. What happened before and after was complicated to describe, but in fact, everything happened in an instant. Wu Ding stepped forward and waved his blade, and then the defensive barrier was torn apart. More than 100 mages vomited blood at the same time, and a genuine void-level warrior died in the hands of his own people. Finally, Wu Ding and Tang In calmly stepped into the range of the temple. And this was just the beginning. Judging from these two attacks, Tang In knew Wu Ding's fighting style. Wu Ding was a heavenly martial artist who was extremely good at compressing and condensing his battle energy. Therefore, what often seemed to be an ordinary attack with no aura actually hit a great horror that could destroy heaven and earth. To put it simply, it was like listening to thunder in silence. It was really the best choice for traveling at home, pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, and pleasing the body and mind. Of course, the magic defensive barrier that gathered the strength of more than 100 mages from the Temple of Gods was not a useless spear. At least, it succeeded in lifting the ordinary appearance of the golden ring blade. In an instant, a strong wind surged. The originally simple and unadorned golden ring blade suddenly soared with a bright golden light, gushing out continuously like a violent tide, instantly radiating in all directions. In the sky, Varen and the others, who had just recovered from the scream, subconsciously looked down and saw the dazzling golden light rolling and surging, unconsciously covering their eyes. They completely lost sight of Tang In and the middle-aged man with a simple face. Then, in just a short moment, the golden light rolled back and took shape. A giant golden blade of light more than 10 feet long was raised high between heaven and earth, so vivid that it seemed to be real. Immediately, an overwhelming and terrifying pressure erupted, as if a level 10 strong wind had passed through. The clouds parted, and the sky lost some of its color. Varen and the other higher-ups, as well as more than 100 mages from the Temple of Gods, only felt that they were standing at the mouth of an evil dragon. Their expressions were bleak, their bodies were cold, and the magic shields around them were rippling. They hurriedly waved their staffs and retreated. Tang In did not see the discomfited scene of birds and bees scattering like birds and beasts. When he raised his head, his vision was completely filled with the giant golden blade aura. Perhaps it was because the center of the tornado was a safe zone, but Tang did not feel the terrifying power like Varen and the others. But even then, he couldn't help but lick his dry lips as he looked at the golden thread-ringed saber that covered the sky and blotted out the sun. And he said in his heart, "Lucky, lucky." Obviously, Tang had already understood the one-move agreement between him and Wu Ding. Wu Ding did not use his most powerful attack, so he had won by a fluke. At this moment, the giant golden blade moved. There was no fancy trick, and there was no need for any fancy tricks. It was just a simple smash, but it came crashing down like a golden mountain or a jade pillar, sweeping away everything in its path. Tangen's line of sight was slightly empty as the blade light moved away. He narrowed his long and narrow eyes and finally saw the clear sky behind him. At the same time, he also saw two holy fighting lights hurtling towards him like comets. They were the two genuine void-grade cultivators who had luckily escaped death just now. Among all the people present, it was estimated that they were the only ones who could truly feel the terrifying power of this saber aura. Seeing the saber aura pressing down, without thinking, they immediately rushed over with their spears. What a joke! If this saber aura was successfully pressed down, wouldn't the temple be cut in half? The speed at which the saber aura pressed down was not fast. Just like a building that was about to collapse, there would always be some buffer time. So when the saber aura tilted at an angle of about 45 degrees, the two frantically rushing void-grade cultivators finally caught up. However, being able to catch up did not mean that they could block it. Although these two void-grade cultivators were under heavy pressure, their holy fighting lights erupted violently without the slightest leeway, and they waved their spears with great tacit understanding, forming a cross shape in the air, blocking the path of the saber aura, intending to lock the blade edge. But with a loud bang, bursts of spatial ripples even revealed the true appearance of ripples, quickly spreading out in all directions. Pause for a while. The giant golden saber aura continued to press down, like a galloping chariot being crushed by a small stone. However, with unwilling roars, the two figures under the saber were quickly blasted away like cannonballs, bringing with them a faint blood mist, crashing into the temple below like kites with broken strings. With a bang, gravel splashed everywhere, and dust spread everywhere. Fuck! Seeing this, Tang-Un's eyes widened, and he couldn't help clenching his fists and cursing. They were F*King genuine void-level cultivators, and they were even using their full strength, but the result was that they were like two insignificant flies that were casually swatted aside. It was simply domineering. Sure enough, the gap between realms was like a chasm. The higher the strength, the more so. Wanting to use numbers to make up for it was basically a pipe dream. In shock, the golden saber aura that was no longer blocked fell smoothly. With a length of more than 100 feet, it would definitely cover some of the temple's buildings, sculptures, stone walls. There was no suspense. It would shatter upon contact. It would collapse upon contact. It was a complete crushing. Not even a speck was left. Finally, the saber aura was about to touch the ground. There was no earth-shattering explosion because the huge saber aura suddenly stopped a few inches before it touched the ground. Wu Ding slowly raised his left hand, holding the saber hilt with both hands at the same time, and stepped forward, "Go!" Before the syllable fell, his figure had already disappeared. At the same time, the golden saber aura was like a giant python that broke into the town, roaring forward and sweeping away everything in its path. Tangen did not follow immediately. He was a little scared. There is no need to say more about the energy of this huge golden saber aura. The key was that with such a huge amount of destructive energy in hand, Wu Ding could still perfectly control it, lifting it as if it was light. Some of the things behind this were really hard to imagine. Taking a deep breath, Tang-Un's expression gradually became solemn, and he took back some of his previous views on the other world's Doqi. To be honest, Tang used to look down on the other world's Do Chi a little. He always felt that Do Chi pursued too much magnificence. Although it was domineering and dazzling enough, it was actually a waste. A lot of Do Chi could not be used to accurately attack the enemy, and instead, it was scattered back into the world. It was really a pity. But now, Tang Yin knew that his experience was too shallow, and he had not seen a real mountain before. How could a powerhouse like Wu Ding, who stood at the peak of martial arts, not notice this situation? The huge saber aura that was previously restrained to the extreme and now perfectly controlled was undoubtedly a good lesson for Tang Yin. But fortunately, there are not many old monsters like this. Otherwise, young people like us will not have a chance to make a name for ourselves. After comforting himself, Twain breathed a sigh of relief. With a flash of his body, he also disappeared from where he was and chased after him. The speed of the saber aura's advancement was not very fast. It was like a heavy chariot that was as heavy as a mountain, and it was really strenuous to run. But at the same time, the momentum of the army was unstoppable, and it looked down on the world. From a distance, the golden saber aura had been completely covered by the dust in the sky. It was like an earth dragon or a giant python, moving straight through the temple. Whether it was a towering statue, a sacred palace, or a thick wall in front of it, it was merciless and went straight through. Only ruins were left, and it was a scene of devastation. It was like the scene of a disaster after a storm, and it was a mess. Witnessing this shocking and brutal scene with his own eyes, F***CK, Owens's voice trembled slightly, and his mouth formed a funny O shape. His expression was completely broken, and his mind was blank. The only thought that was still hovering in his mind was, Lord Varen, thank you. I'm grateful to your whole family. He did have to thank Varen, because if it were not for the fact that Varen did not trust them, Owens and Sylvia, who had considerable combat power, would have definitely participated in the encirclement and suppression of Tang Yin. Looking at the scene in front of him, if this was not courting death, then what was? Sylvia did not think so much. Looking at the earth dragon python that was wreaking havoc, although her expression was also extremely shocked, she felt strangely calm in her heart. That's it. That wretched guy. How could he not bring enough backup and dare to come here to cause trouble for the temple? Sure enough, it was this strange thought that made Sylvia one of the few people in the temple who could still maintain her composure. She pursed her lips and narrowed her eyes, staring at the middle-aged man with a simple face in the dust. This strength, he should be at the heaven rank. Who was this person? Why had she never heard of him before? It was no wonder that Sylvia was puzzled. Even if he was a hermit expert who liked to stay in the deep mountains and forests, as long as he had the shocking strength of the heaven rank, there should be some rumors about him in the world. However, Sylvia searched through all the impressions of experts in her mind, but she could not reconcile them with the simple face in front of her. Wait a minute. With that guy's ability to disguise, it should be easy for him to completely change a person's appearance, right? It had to be said that relying on her familiarity with Tang Yin, Sylvia's guess was getting closer and closer to the truth. But that was it. Who would have thought that the sword Godbrand would help the evil heretic Tang Yin to retaliate against the brand's belief in the temple? Not to mention that he was carrying such a bandit's gold-threaded broadsword. In the blink of an eye, the rolling dust had driven straight into the depths of the temple, dragging out a huge dark gully that looked like it had been plowed by more than 10 old oxen side by side. The stone slabs in the middle were shattered, and new soil was overturned. It continued to spread forward, as if it was going to cut the temple in half. But fortunately, this disaster did not happen. When it crazily advanced to the center of the temple, which was the center of the square of the main hall, the earth dragon giant python slowly stopped. Then, suddenly, the golden hoop rang and the dust exploded. Wu Ding pulled back the slightly trembling gold-threaded broadsword and calmly sheathed it on his back. He took a step sideways to let Tang in, who was behind him, and once again returned to his ordinary appearance that had no sense of existence. This style of not fighting for the limelight was actually a solid performance of the identity of a golden bodyguard. Any noise would eventually return to silence. This was the unbreakable truth of the law. But the consequences brought about by this were not something that could be calmed down. In the sky above the main hall, Varen and the others stared blankly at the huge gully that stretched across half of the temple. They moved their gazes stiffly, looking back and forth until they saw the experts of the temple outside the light shield, who were also stunned and speechless. Gulp! Their throats moved, and they swallowed with difficulty. In the square, there was dead silence. After a moment, Tang In touched his nose, stepped forward, and looked up at Varen and the others. He spread out his hands and said, "As I said earlier, I will talk to you face to face. Sai, I really don't understand what you big shots are thinking. The great demon king sent people to chase and intercept the brave warrior. In the end, because the troops were scattered, the brave warrior finally killed his way to the front. Well, don't you think it's too old-fashioned? Look, now it's like this. It's really, why bother?" The sunlight was warm, soft, and docile. But Varen felt that the sunlight seemed to be much more vicious, and he was a little dazed. He gradually came back to his senses. First, he looked at Tang In, and then at Wu Ding, who was standing behind Tang In. He paused for a moment, as if he had just confirmed the relationship between the two. Finally, he turned his gaze back to Tang In and said dryly, "What do you want to talk about?" "Withdraw from the north," Tang In replied with a smile. "Impossible." Varen refused, not to mention that he had no right to make such a decision. Even if he did, he would not dare to. Because everyone knew that once they withdrew from the north, the foundation that the temple had spent thousands of years building here would vanish in an instant. This was a responsibility that even the Pope could not bear. Then there's nothing to talk about. With a shrug, Tang In simply gave up. Then, he turned to look at Wu Ding and said seriously, "Elder Lu, I promised to accompany you here for sightseeing. Why don't we start now?" Wu Ding smiled and nodded. "Okay, come. Look here. Actually, I'm not familiar with the temple. I've only been here once. But since we're here, there are some classic attractions that we can't miss." For example, Tang In pressed the brim of his wide-brimmed hat. If he had a small flag in his hand, he would look like a living professional tour guide. He pointed to the huge statue on the roof of the main hall. For example, this statue, well, although there are statues everywhere, they're completely overgrown. But this one is different. It's the largest statue within 100 miles, and it's said that it was blessed by the god of light. Whoever it stares, it will get pregnant. Haha, just kidding. Maybe you're wondering why this statue is brand new. Then there's a trick to it. Haha, that's right. This is the one I knocked down the last time I came here. In the huge and silent square, only Tang could be heard pointing here and there. He spoke so fluently that it was as if his mouth was floating in the air. And if you exclude the malicious ridicule in it, listening to it was actually quite interesting. Varen and the other high-level officials looked at each other. Their faces were full of confusion, and they were at a loss for a moment. What was he trying to do? Their confusion did not last long, because Tang In spoke again. He waved his hand and said, "Well, the introduction of this scenic spot is over. There's no need for it to exist anymore." Wu Ding smiled and nodded slightly. Jingling, the golden-ringed saber moved again. It was just a simple wave, and a crescent-shaped saber light broke through the air. "No!" With a loud bang, under the shocked and angry gazes of Varen and the others, the statue that had just been erected not long ago was hit by the crescent-shaped saber light head-on. It was directly cut in half at the waist. The upper half of the statue, which still had a benevolent smile on its face, tilted its head and fell, smashing a huge hole in the roof of the main hall. Then there was a loud bang from inside, and the whole main hall trembled slightly. The holy outer wall of the holy wall fell down, turning into a gray spotted dog. After doing all this, Tang In and Wu Ding no longer paid attention to the half of the statue. Instead, they fixed their eyes on an inconspicuous side hall not far away. "Hey, do you see that? This is amazing. It's called the Forbidden Land of Worship. It's a place used by the temple to store some old and useless things. It's called a memorial. Oh, of course, there are some good things in there. The reason why most of the temple was destroyed last time was because I borrowed the devil's skull from there. Devil's skull? Here? Yes, you didn't see it. The scene of the devil's skull exploding at the end. That guy was really spectacular. Just thinking about it makes me miss it. Damn it. Killed him. At this time, Varen and the others understood what Tang Yin and Roland meant. They were not here for sightseeing. They were clearly here to demolish it. As soon as he finished speaking, the temple mages suspended in the air chanted in unison. Magic elements of various colors competed to shine, some strong and some weak, like brilliant fireworks. However, before they could attack, Wu Ding, who had finished listening to the introduction, had already waved his sword again. The same crescent-shaped sword light dragged an afterimage in the air and crashed straight into the forbidden land of worship. Boom! Dust flew up, and suddenly 5 colored rays of light bloomed continuously. However, under the powerful suppression of the crescent-shaped sword light, the forbidden land of worship became a pile of ruins without any suspense. Wu Ding looked carefully at the ruins and shook his head. There's nothing good here. Tang Yin saw this and opened his mouth, then laughed. Oh, Elder Lu, your standards are too high. Although most of the things displayed in the forbidden land of worship were damaged and old, it was undeniable that there were indeed some good things here. For example, when Tang An went in last time, he saw the armors and weapons that contained considerable power. Most of these things were relics left behind by famous clergymen in the past. The 5 colored rays, just now, were automatically triggered by them after they felt threatened. It could be assumed that if these things were to be spread out, it would definitely cause a bloody storm because of the fight for treasures. However, they had encountered Wu Ding this time. Under the powerful saber light, they were not allowed to struggle at all and were directly annihilated. It was also because of this that when Wu Ding saw that nothing could withstand his sword light, he naturally shook his head in disappointment and said that there was nothing good here. At least, there was nothing good like the demon skull that Tang Yin saw when he came last time. The temple is so big, there must be something good. We can slowly look for it later. But Elder Lu, after a pause, Tang Yin grinned and pointed to the temple mages in the sky. In order to not disturb our fun, shouldn't you get rid of these annoying flies first? Wu Ding looked up and narrowed his eyes. He did not immediately make a move, but looked at Tang Yin with a faint smile. This is why you've been trying to provoke them before. Huh, Elder Lu is wise. Tang Yin did not deny it. He laughed and admitted it generously. The only person Twain really wanted to kill this time was Razor. Everything else was done in passing under the premise of causing trouble for the Temple of Light. He wanted to attack them as much as he could. The biggest reason for his plan was naturally Sword God Wu Ding. However, Wu Ding once said that he would not take the initiative to kill people for him. This undoubtedly reduced the effect of the attack. However, Tang Yin was not just for show. He was very cunning. What? You won't take the initiative to kill people for me? Sure, but now that someone is trying to kill me as a golden bodyguard, you can't just leave me in the lurch. Chapter 879. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh in the sky, blazing fireballs, icicles, dazzling light swords, and so on flew through the air one after another. Amidst the continuous whistling sounds, colorful magic spells intertwined and pressed down, creating a spectacular scene for a moment. On the ground below, Tang Yin raised his head and sighed with emotion as if he was admiring the fireworks. It's so King beautiful. Old Lu, if you still don't make a move, we'll have to pack up and go back to our hometown. Wu Ding shook his head helplessly. He had experienced Tang Yin's shamelessness before, but it was obvious that it was far from enough. He put his hand on Tang Yin's shoulder and said, "Let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, the golden ringed blade opened up a path and disappeared instantly. As soon as they left, there was a loud roar and a wave of air rushed to the sky. Many magic spells pressed down like a torrential downpour, covering half of the square in an instant. As an existence that was on par with the temple knights, the temple mages were famous. Naturally, they were not small fries. If this round of magic bombardment was used on the battlefield, a group of barbarian warriors would lose their ability to fight in an instant if they were lucky. But right now, well, it was a waste. On the left side of the square, Tang casually pushed away the flying stones and said, "No way, Elder Lu. With your cultivation, do we still need to run away?" He was simply enjoying the show. With the strength of the sword god Wu Ding, if he went all out, there was no need for him to dodge this round of magic bombardment. But then again, if he could solve the problem with 10% of his strength, why would he use 30% of his strength? Wu Ding was not a person who liked to be in the limelight. Wu Ding was too lazy to explain. He raised his broadsword, and the overbearing and arrogant golden fighting aura reappeared. A huge golden blade, aura similar to the one before, quickly condensed and formed in the void. It was swung out before it finished accumulating power. It was like a huge palm leaf fan that swept back and forth in the vast sky. Whoosh! In terms of power, this blade light was obviously not as powerful as the one before. But even so, it was not something that a weak mage could withstand. In an instant, cries of alarm came from the sky, and the magic light dissipated. The hundreds of magicians were like birds, insects, and beasts in the forest who saw a tiger coming out of its hole to look for food. They instantly scattered and fled in all directions. This scene was just like what Tang Yin had said earlier. A swarm of flies had gathered together, buzzing noisily, and was extremely annoying. Now the huge saber light was like a huge fly swatter, and it immediately scattered. What a motley crew! Seeing that the Sacred Hall mages were not as tenacious as they had imagined, and were wiped out in the end, Tang couldn't help but feel a little regretful. He shook his head in disdain and waved his hand in invitation. "Let's go. Elder Lu, this way please. Let's go to the next sightseeing spot." Trash, trash, a bunch of trash. Varen and the rest of the higher-ups were so angry that their faces turned ashen when they saw the shrine mages that they had pinned their hopes on dispersing in an instant. However, the shrine mages were also wronged. Those who had not faced the huge saber light directly would never know how terrifying the huge pressure that made people unable to resist was. What do we do now? They looked at the damn guy below, who was smiling and waving his hand to introduce something to the middle-aged man with a simple face. The higher-ups could not help but feel their hearts skip a beat. The corners of their eyes and mouths twitched. In the end, they could only turn their heads to look at Varen, their faces full of bewilderment and horror. It could be said that the situation had developed to this point. None of the higher-ups of the shrine mages had expected it. Originally, in their eyes, Tang was just a weak sheep compared to the powerful shrine mages. Even if he had some combat strength, he had just evolved from a sheep to a jumping goat, and was not worth mentioning. But they never thought that this sheep would take off his coat and transform into a big gray wolf with a ferocious face. This was completely unacceptable. Varen's expression changed. His grip on the crystal staff tightened and loosened, as if he was hesitating. No one knew what Varen was thinking, but someone below jumped out first and rushed towards Tang without any regard for their own safety. It was the two genuine void-level warriors. Although they had suffered heavy injuries when they had blocked the attack of the huge golden saber light, they were still injured. But Wu Ding did not have any killing intent and did not kill them, so the two of them naturally did not die. Of course, based on what happened just now, the two of them, as genuine void-level warriors, naturally knew how terrifying Wu Ding was. Therefore, they should not continue to entangle themselves with death. However, in the current situation, they had no choice but to attack. In this battle, only they could resist a little and fight for an opportunity for the shrine mages to attack. Therefore, seeing that no one dared to stop Tang they could only bite the bullet and rush forward again. It should be said that the strength of a genuine void-level warrior was still very impressive, especially after they put down their identity and adopted a strategy of guerrilla warfare. They could also hold on for a while. It was precisely because of this that the mages who had originally scattered gathered again in the air. However, the good times did not last long. After a few impacts, Wu Ding saw the intentions of the two and increased the strength of the saber-light. So, a rather strange scene happened. Bang, the saber-light flashed, and the void-level warrior who barely resisted suddenly vomited blood and flew back dozens of feet away. Another saber strike, and another void-level warrior followed in his footsteps. Turning around, Wu Ding, who looked calm as if he had done nothing, struck again and simply destroyed the scenic spot in front of him. If he had time, he would also drive away the mages gathered in the air. A series of movements were done smoothly and orderly, and the field could not help but be silent again. With the withdrawal of the shrine mages, the semicircular light shield over the shrine had disappeared. However, the masters on the periphery looked at each other and saw a similar look of horror in each other's eyes. They hesitated, and no one dared to step into the shrine easily. That was the high and mighty master of the Knights Department, a genuine void-level warrior. Now, they were like two rubber balls under the feet of a child, being kicked around casually without any resistance. And the mysterious shrine mages, who had always been arrogant, were now like mosquitoes and flies, fleeing with a slap, scattering with a wave of a hand. Damn it. The pressure was as great as a mountain. What else could they say? What should they do? What should they say? What should they do? It's over, it's over, it's over. Where did this monster come from? This time, the shrine is completely finished. Looking at the ruins of another magnificent building, Owens's face was sluggish, his hands clutching his hair until it was completely destroyed into the shape of a bird's nest, but he still did not realize it. Although he could not bear to see Varen and the other higher-ups, he was secretly happy to see them suffer. However, Owens was still a clergyman after all. When he saw that Twain and Selena were completely treating the shrine as a playground and destroying the rhythm of the destruction, he could not help but feel a sense of sadness in his heart. After all, this was not an ordinary town church, but the headquarters of the Northern Shrine. In the end, if this place was destroyed together with Holy Light City, Owens felt that he would no longer have the face to stay in the north. Perhaps this was the effect that Tang In had hoped for. Sylvia's thoughts were almost similar to Owens. To be honest, she was also frightened. Previously, when the shrine was in power, she was still a little worried about Tang In's fate. But now, who would save the shrine? No one could. At least for now, that was the case. In a trance, the two people standing on the roof did not realize that the building ruins were gradually approaching their feet. Fortunately, Tang In, who was staring at the two bruised and battered void-grade warriors, secretly wondering if he would have a chance to pick up something later, looked up and saw the two people. After a pause, he grinned and waved to greet them. "Hey, we meet again." A moment later, ahem, Owens coughed twice, looking a little helpless. He wanted to greet them back, but the other party was obviously here for Sylvia, who was in a daze, and he was beautifully ignored. After coming back to her senses, Sylvia looked at Tang In and pursed her lips. She wanted to say something, but she could not say it. What could she say? Ask them to stop? How could she? She took a breath and said expressionlessly, "Isn't this enough? What do you want to do?" "What I want to do? TSK. There are a lot of reasons. But since you asked, well, how about arm wrestling another day? I've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time." Chapter 880. Posturing was a skill, and it was also an impromptu performance. Since it was a skill, there was naturally a difference between high and low. The so-called low level meant that he himself didn't understand it, but he pretended to understand it very well. Then, he used some kind of reserved and unfathomable expression to justify himself, and finally succeeded in scaring the other party. This could be considered as one of the successful ways to act tough. The so-called high was simply to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger. To forge iron, one had to be tough. Only a bloody knife could make a casual cut. This was the general principle. Between the two, the success rate and safety of the latter was generally much higher than the former. Do not laugh, and do not take it to heart, because since this was a performance, there would be a difference between good and bad. Don't you see how many people who act tough become idiots after acting tough for a long time? Fortunately, Tang In was obviously not one of them. Although it was a little too pretentious to change the topic from humiliating the Temple of Light to arm wrestling, one could not deny that Tang In had the confidence to be pretentious. He had come all this way, killed Reiser at the foot of the city, and destroyed the ancient spell formation in front of the enemy. Then, he broke into Holy Light City and toyed with countless powerhouses of the Temple of Light in the palm of his hand. Again, only a bloody knife could make a casual cut. Therefore, when he said, "Let's find a time to arm wrestle another day," no one found it funny when they heard such pretentious words. Xiao Weian was in a daze. Wu Ding looked at the two of them with a smile. Owens opened his mouth and was full of admiration. He sighed that this guy was definitely an expert at picking up girls. After a while, Xiao Weian snapped out of her daze. "Are you kidding me?" She looked at Owens beside her, who took a big step back and looked up at the sky, as if he wanted to see a flower on Varen's face not far away. "What kind of joke is this?" Xiao Weian asked. Tang In spread his hands and said innocently, "I'm serious. I'm not joking." Yes, Tang In was serious. Perhaps Sylvia was joking when she said, "How about arm wrestling? I only like people who are stronger than me." However, she did not know that a certain male chauvinist was having a fit. For this reason, he had been cultivating his physical strength for nearly half a year in the system space, also that he could show off his position the next time they met. Perhaps she was infected by his serious mood. Sylvia's heart skipped a beat. She thought of something and said seriously, "All right, arm wrestling it is. If I win, you and this sire will immediately leave St. Light City. How about it?" Tang In couldn't help but be slightly taken aback when he heard this. Owens even covered his face as he couldn't bear to look directly at them. "Sister, you're really daring. Such an unreliable suggestion. Furthermore, what do you guys think of such a serious matter? A farce? Why don't they just play rock, paper, scissors instead? Wouldn't that be even more straightforward?" "I have no objection," Wu Ding decisively intervened and said with a smile. It was not that he was extremely confident in Tang In. He just felt that the matter in front of him was very interesting. Interesting, and that was enough. As for the matter of the Temple of Light, who cared? Anyway, the anger in his heart had almost been vented, so he didn't care. As the saying goes, everyone has a share. Among the four people present, excluding Tang In, who was the final decision-maker, Wu Ding and Sylvia all looked at the dumbfounded Owens at the same time. After being stunned for a moment, Owens sighed. In his heart, he thought that the world must have gone crazy. Then, he simply raised his hands. "I completely agree." Unlike Wu Ding, Owens' decision was based on his absolute confidence in Sylvia. Arm wrestling with this freakishly strong woman? What a joke. Isn't that just competing with the sword god, huh? With a loud laugh, Tang In cracked his knuckles. How could he be an ordinary person? Seeing that all three of them agreed, he naturally wouldn't back down. "All right, arm wrestling it is. But if I win, His words suddenly paused, and a disruptor appeared. First, it was Wu Ding, then Tang In, and the other two almost simultaneously frowned and looked up at the sky not far away. There, more than 10 high-level members of the Temple of Light were standing in a circle in the void. Their hands were held flat, and their red robes were fluttering. More than 10 beams of pure magic power were focused on a bright light source in the void. The powerful transmission seemed to directly create an artificial sun. And under the bright light source, Varen stood in the void with his head raised and his hands raised. His expression was extremely pious, as if he was carrying out a sacred and solemn ritual. There must be a demon behind this abnormality. Sure enough, just as Tang In and the others squinted their eyes, an object appeared out of thin air in the bright light source. It was a staff that seemed to be made of gold and wood, with simple and mysterious patterns and a huge transparent crystal overflowing with flowing light at the top. The overall shape was that of a magic staff. When Pu-Yi came out of the void, everyone's eyes lit up. It seemed that the light between heaven and earth had increased a little because of this. Wow, a holy weapon of light, the scepter of judgment. The Temple of Light really put in a lot of effort this time. Looking up and squinting, Wu Ding's eyebrows showed some seriousness and also some emotion. He shook his head as if he felt that it was a little unbelievable. Scepter of Judgment. What is that? This is the holy weapon, the Scepter of Judgment. Tang Yin's doubts were understandable. After all, he did not know much about magic. But Sylvia's and Owens's faces were mixed with a little confusion amidst the excitement, which was a little puzzling. A holy weapon of light. From this title, one could tell the origin of this so-called Scepter of Judgment. But Sylvia and Roland were members of the Temple of Light, and their positions were not low. Now, they showed an expression as if this was the first time they had seen it, which was naturally puzzling. Wu Ding nodded and explained, "Yes, this is the weapon that is said to have been used by the God of Light, the Scepter of Judgment." "Why? Have you never seen it before?" "Oh, that's normal. This thing has always been in the hands of the successive popes and will not be taken out easily. It's reasonable that you have not seen it before. In fact, I have only seen it once to be able to see it here this time." "Oh, I understand." Pausing for a moment, Wu Ding lowered his head to look at Tang Yin, whose face was filled with bewilderment. Wu Ding nodded his head in realization and sighed with a light smile. "Ha ha, Tang Yin, I didn't expect you to be so influential." Pointing at the scepter in the sky, Wu Ding sighed with emotion. "Do you know the real function of these holy weapons?" "Yes, to create miracles. But now, they're completely used to deal with you. Don't you think you have a lot of face?" Create miracles?" Sylvia and Owens frowned at the same time. It should be known that besides being clergy, they were also believers with a high belief in the God of Light. In their view, the real miracles were miracles sent by God and could not be faked, forged, or blasphemed in the slightest. Now, listening to Wu Ding's evaluation of the supreme, holy weapons of the temple and questioning the various miracles clearly recorded in the past history books, they were naturally unhappy. Owens was fine. Even if he was dissatisfied, he would not say it so blatantly. But Sylvia was different. Her jade face suddenly sank, and she frowned. "Your Excellency, miracles are not created, but the grace or warning given to the world by God Father." Wu Ding nodded and smiled. He did not refute anything. Tang Yin came back to his senses and immediately pulled Wu Ding to the side. He whispered anxiously, "Is this thing very powerful? Elder Liu, you can't solve it?" He shook his head. "It's very powerful, but if that hypocritical well, if the Pope himself came to use it, it would be really troublesome. But for now, it's just SOSO. Phew, that's good, that's good." Wu Ding's evaluation undoubtedly made Tang Yin feel relieved. He first let out a long sigh of relief. Then his eyes turned slightly. "Elder Liu, didn't you just regret that there was no good thing in the temple? Now there's one. Why don't you take it directly?" "Ha, this thing is hot, and it's useless to me. It's not even as good as a bottle of inferior barley wine. It's not a good thing." "And are you sure you want me to take it? Could it be that there's something else going on?" Asked carefully. Tang Yin was also scared. Whether it was the old butler or Wu Ding, they seemed to like to confirm the other person's answer first, and then laugh at the other person after the result was out. "It's not really a way, but if I take it, it's likely that my true identity will be exposed." Tang Yin was immediately dumbfounded. "Damn, it can't be, then what do we do?" Chapter 881. One generation of nouveau riche, 3 generations of nobles. Something like foundation was like temperament. It could not be seen and could not be touched. But what was undeniable and undeniable was that it was indeed real. Therefore, although Tang Yin had exhausted all his means and had a great advantage, it could be said that he had dragged the millennial temple into the abyss of the quagmire. But he had never thought of facing the temple head-on and killing his way to their door. Instead, he had been carefully hiding in the dark, pushing the rioting believers, red-eyed warriors, and so on to the front line to charge and break through the enemy lines. Tang Yin knew very well that even a tortoise would become a demon after living for 1,000 years, let alone the powerful Temple of Light. 1,000 years of history, 1,000 years of accumulation, gave the other party a terrifying foundation that was as deep as the earth. This was not something that a small assassin like him could single-handedly destroy. It could be said that this time, if it were not for the sword god Wu Ding accompanying him, he would not have come at all, and now the facts had proven that his caution was indeed correct. After throwing out the ancient array, a number of powerhouses, the Temple of Light sorcerers, and even 3 genuine void warriors, the Temple of Light struck again. This time, they took out their signature magic weapon, the Holy Weapon of Light. Because of his lack of knowledge about magic, Tang Yin did not know what kind of terrifying power this so-called Holy Weapon, the Scepter of Judgment, had. But now, listening to Wu Ding's words, saying that this could force out his true identity, Tang Yin had a general understanding in his heart. Well, anyway, he could not afford to provoke them. But regardless of whether they could provoke them or not, Varen and the other higher-ups had spent so much effort to summon the scepter. Obviously, they would not let them go easily. As soon as it left the void, the Scepter of Judgment, overflowing with flowing light and carrying a black hole on its back, quietly hovered in the air, quietly exuding a distant and mysterious aura, as if it had been there since ancient times. For some reason, everyone in the Temple of Light, including Tang Yin, looked up at the Scepter of Light and felt as if they were lying in a hot spring. Their bodies and minds were warm and extremely relaxed. Even the air beside their noses seemed to be much more lively and fresh, as if they were flying freely in heaven. It was a good feeling, but Tang Yin's expression gradually became gloomy. Whether it was in the virtual novels of the modern world or the real world of the alternate world, Tang Yin had heard of such a saying. That was, as long as an extraordinary divine artifact was born, it would definitely cause a phenomenon in the heavens and the earth, which would then change the surrounding environment. For example, the black scabbard sword in Wu Ding's hand. During the bet in Hanshui City, the moment Wu Ding drew his long sword, the entire side hall was shrouded in a murderous aura of the sword. Its sharpness was intimidating. It was the same with the Scepter of Judgment. Although it did not reveal its sharp teeth, the strange phenomenon that easily covered the entire temple showed that it was indeed worthy of its title as a holy weapon of light. This was going to be troublesome on the west side of the temple, on the other side of the river. The believers and residents of the city who were escorted here in advance did not sense the strange aura in the temple. However, the restless atmosphere caused by the destruction of their home had gradually calmed down and was now completely silent. All the believers and residents raised their heads in a daze, their expressions blank. They were motionless like statues by the river. They had never seen or recognized the Scepter of Judgment that was overflowing with flowing light. But for some reason, as soon as the scepter appeared, it firmly attracted their attention like a magnet. Then their hearts palpitated incessantly, as if there was a voice in their hearts constantly calling out softly. In a trance, with a buzzing sound, the quiet crowd suddenly broke out into bursts of uncontrollable exclamations. At the top of the Scepter of Judgment that was hovering in mid-air, the flowing light of the transparent crystal suddenly began to flicker with bits of silver-white light. The next moment, the light radiated a halo. A flash. The bleak and colorless light disappeared, and the boundless sky was suddenly dyed with a touch of silver-white light that symbolized the light. The strands of irregular flowing clouds were also covered with a layer of silver-white halo. A flash. The entire temple was instantly covered by a faint, flickering silver light. The multicolored glass, the green tiles, the red eaves, and the statues and sculptures with different expressions were all shining with a silver-white brilliance, whether they were flat reflections or sharp edges. Even the messy ruins, after being covered with a layer of silver light, vaguely revealed a sense of solemnity and holiness. A flash. All the faces in the field were covered with a layer of faint silver light. Confusion, excitement, anticipation, vigilance, disapproval. Their expressions were all different, and they were all different. In a short moment, the silver light flickered, and everything in the world was bathed in the light of the silver light together. Suddenly, rumbling, like rolling thunder, suddenly exploded in the sky, but it didn't seem abrupt. In fact, everyone felt that this was natural, and they were even a little expectant, just like the sound of a few wooden hammers before the trial started in the court of judgment. Realization dawned on them. The trial was about to begin. As soon as the thought appeared in their minds, the flowing clouds that had gathered in the sky above the scepter suddenly emitted a bright silver light, radiating in all directions. Then, a towering shadow in a dark golden coat slowly condensed and appeared behind the flowing clouds. Gold and silver light flickered, complementing each other, making the shadow look even more solemn and holy. With the sun above its head and half sitting on the clouds, the shadow wasn't very clear in the eyes of the people below. They could only vaguely see that it was holding a codex in its left hand and a dark golden hammer in its right hand. However, this was also in line with everyone's psychological expectations. How could the face of a god be so sacred and dignified that ordinary people could easily look at it and blaspheme it? In the next moment, the hammer fell, and a loud clang echoed between heaven and earth and in the hearts of all living beings. Then a majestic voice resounded through the world. Oracle Codex, Punishment Chapter. It wasn't the shadow that spoke, but Varen below. At this moment, he made a mysterious gesture with his hands in front of his chest, as if he had peeked at the codex above his head, and solemnly repeated, "I love the world, I love the good people, and I love the sinners." The floating world is a sea of evil. Unintentional, intentional, active, and passive, all of them are sinful. Don't seek redress of injustice. I seek redress of injustice, and I will exact retribution. The rumbling voice carried an irresistible majesty that reverberated in all directions, reaching the bottom of everyone's hearts. In an instant, all the mistakes, sins, hatred, and other emotions from childhood to adulthood, from life to death, were clearly dug out from the bottom of everyone's hearts, and they were dissected to accept the god's judgment. Plop, plop. With continuous dull sounds, a large number of believers on the riverbank knelt on the ground, their hands clasped together and their foreheads touching the ground. No one knew who started it, but suddenly there was a sound of repentance. Countless sobbing voices recounted the mistakes they had made in the past, and their expressions were sorrowful as they wept bitterly. They converged into one, buzzing like a swarm of bees, and it was impossible to hear any specific sins. However, the converged sounds of repentance and the atmosphere of atonement spread far and wide, echoing the majestic judgment in the sky. It added to the solemn atmosphere of the place, and made people have no choice but to bow down and beg for forgiveness. Soon, a group of experts on the periphery of the temple also knelt on one knee, their hands on their chests, as they excitedly sang the punishment chapter that Varen spoke of. The scene was solemn and respectful for a moment. Then, plop, Tang turned his head slightly stiffly and saw Sylvia and Owens also kneeling on one knee with their eyes lowered. Although they didn't respond with their mouths, their lowered heads toward the shadow in the sky were undoubtedly expressing their humble attitude towards the Father as clerics. Licking his dry lips, to be honest, Tangen's body was also trembling slightly. He also had the impulse to kneel down and listen to the Lord's anger. This wasn't because of a herd mentality, but because of the feeling of guilt that gushed out from his heart, conveying a strong desire to conquer to every inch of his flesh and skin, both inside and outside his body. Under the cover of the silver brilliance, and with the constant sound of the code of Codex in his ears, every trace of sin in Tangen's heart, including stealing money from his family to buy toys when he was young, poking the back of a girl in the front row with a pencil just to see her get angry, and so on, were all things that he had completely forgotten. But now, they were all being dug up one by one, placed clearly in front of his eyes, and constantly compounded with the guilt in his heart. Damn it, have I ever made so many mistakes? Why don't I remember? But it seems like I did a little. That little girl was called Jing Jing or something, and I think she was my neighbor when I was young. She looked like a little white flower, really beautiful. At that time, I should have liked her, although she hated me because I often made her cry. But later, when she moved away, I seemed to have secretly cried. If I think about it this way, are these all true? Then, am I not guilty of unforgivable crimes? Bah, it doesn't count, it doesn't count. When I was young, I even helped an old granny cross the road, held flowers, and beat the waist drum to welcome the leaders. How does this not count? Grabbing his hair, Tangen's expression was a little ferocious and tangled. He racked his brains to think of all the good deeds he had done, and collected them to build a dam to resist the constant impact of a sinful black current in his heart. At first, he could still bear it. Although Tang, on in the present world, was not a good person, he did not make any big mistakes either. The two offset each other, and he could still bear it. However, when he recalled the journey in the other world and the carnage along the way, the dam in his heart suddenly collapsed, and he didn't know where it was washed away in an instant. It turns out that I really am unforgivable. Every mistake shall be punished. Every sin shall be purified. As the judge's voice slowly became more and more dignified, Varen glanced down. The corners of his mouth moved, revealing a smug smile, as if everything was under his control. On the ground below, Tang Un's body trembled. He looked down at his hands and shook his head slightly, his gloomy expression somewhat self-deprecating. Wu Ding's eyes flickered slightly when he saw this. He seemed a little regretful, but he did not say anything, nor did he make any move to stop him. He just looked on indifferently. Then his gaze froze. He raised one hand, touched his nose halfway, and then raised it high above his head. Facing Varen, whose smile froze, and the towering dark golden shadow in midair, he curled up his 4 fingers one by one, leaving only his middle finger. He looked up with a serious and mocking expression. If you don't act tough, we're still enemies. Every evil shall be judged. Pause for a while. Varen looked at the big middle finger with a solemn expression. Although he did not understand what it meant, looking at Tang Un's mocking smile, there was no doubt that he understood. The corner of his eyes twitched. He was shocked and furious. He suddenly changed the topic. You must be killed. Killed on the spot. Thrown into the magma of hell and burned by the evil soul fire for eternity. Of course, this was not the content of any code. If it was spoken in a hysterical tone, it would be a vicious curse. However, Tang Yin shrugged, treating it as a fart. He twisted his lower body, and his bones cracked. His body became relaxed and straight again. He frowned and turned his head. Elder Lu, what kind of evil means of attack is this? After a short pause, the corners of Wu Ding's mouth gradually rose. He looked at Tang Yin with faint admiration. This is the self-proclaimed divine art of the temple. In my opinion, it's roughly a variant of psychic magic, mental magic, and the like. However, after combining it with the unique aura effect of the temple, it creates an extraordinary scene of the gods being judged, and its power is multiplied. Well, I'm still a little curious. How did you get out of it? That was the reason. In the eyes of Wu Ding, who stood at the peak of martial arts and saw through the origin of power, the so-called divine art, after stripping away all kinds of external effects, was the general mental and psychic magic. Of course, this was not the meaning of despising the divine art. The 1,000-year heritage of the temple was not a joke. Under their influence, the believers of the brand had long subconsciously accepted the concept of gods. In this way, after seeing the gods come to the world in person to preside over the judgment, the impact on everyone's mind was naturally imaginable. For example, the believers and residents on the other side of the river. The sins that they were confessing now were almost all secrets that were buried deep in their hearts and were ready to be taken into the coffin. If they said it under normal circumstances, it might take countless duels and countless trials to settle it one by one. But now, under this divine art, they said it very easily. They were even afraid that their hearts were not sincere, so they shouted even louder. Therefore, Wu Ding was indeed a little curious about how Tang Yin got rid of this effect. I see. After explaining that it was mental magic, Tang In thought of the Eye of Disaster and suddenly understood what Wu Ding meant when he said that it was a miracle. Indeed, if he did not take out the holy weapon of light so openly, in such a frightening dark golden shadow and gorgeous scene suddenly appeared out of thin air at a certain trial site, the believers would definitely associate it with a miracle. He really put in a lot of effort. After thinking about it, Tang In could not help but shake his head and laugh. Then, he spread his hands and explained, "Actually, it's nothing. Well, they think that sin is a scourge and are afraid of being stained with it. But I'm different," he laughed self-deprecatingly. "I've long admitted that I'm a hopeless villain. If there are sins, so be it. When there are too many debts, there's no need to worry. When there are too many lice, there's no need to itch. It's no big deal." Listening to these valiant remarks, Wu Ding could not help but be stunned. After being stunned for a while, he raised his head and laughed. "Ha! What a hopeless villain! Black and white, good and evil, the rugged and smooth path. It seems relatively distant, but when it evolves to the extreme, it's close to the real great path. Little Tang, oh little Tang, you're destined to have a great future, a great future." Blinking, Tang In did not understand what he was saying, but he felt that it was awesome. After pondering for a while, he realized that Wu Ding seemed to want him to continue being a villain and carry it forward. His gaze suddenly changed. He carefully looked at Wu Ding's expression, trying to see if it was a reverse taunt. Well, it did not matter if it was a taunt or not. The way the two of them talked and laughed, as if there was no one else around, undoubtedly greatly irritated Varen, who was in the air. As a holy weapon of light, the scepter of judgment naturally had more than just mental attacks. After hastily ending the declaration of judgment, Varen's expression suddenly turned serious, and he slowly waved his hand down. At the same time, the sound of rolling thunder appeared again. The towering and majestic shadow also waved its right arm, and a dark gold hammer as large as a thundercloud smashed toward Tang In with a terrifying force that could destroy the world. Before the hammer arrived, an irresistible and immovable will of the god had already filled every corner of the area in an instant. Sylvia and Owens, who were kneeling on one knee, were stunned at first, and then their bodies suddenly stiffened. F***CK. Owens raised his head with difficulty and glared fiercely at Varen, who had a ruthless expression on his face. He gritted his teeth. Sylvia's situation was not much better. Her arm, which was supporting herself on the blue tile, trembled violently, and spiderweb-like cracks instantly spread across the entire roof of the side hall. However, she still could not straighten her delicate body, which was half-bent. Obviously, Varen's move was not only to kill Tang In and Sylvia, but also to obliterate the two disobedient clergymen. What kind of move is this? Tang In could no longer care about whether Wu Ding's words were sarcastic or not. He frowned and asked as he felt the force madly pressing against him from all directions. It's still a mental attack, but one that can affect the physical body. After a pause, Wu Ding narrowed his eyes and raised his head. He continued unhurriedly. To put it simply, if you are hit by this hammer, not only will your mind collapse instantly, but your body will also vanish into thin air and turn into ashes. TCH, what's the way to break it? Twain's question was very concise and comprehensive. He believed that no matter how heaven-defying the power of the scepter of judgment was, it was impossible for it to suppress Wooding. Wooding did not answer immediately. Instead, he waved the golden ring sword in his hand and asked, "What do you think of this sword?" "It's pretty good. It has a beautiful appearance and is of high quality at a reasonable price. It's a must-have for traveling and robbing." Looking at Wu Ding's increasingly speechless expression, his voice gradually weakened. Finally, Tang In grinned and said, "Well, it's a matter of life and death. Elder Liu, don't keep me in suspense. If you have something to say, just say it." Sighing helplessly, Wu Ding shook his head and said, "What I want to say is that no matter how strong the scepter of judgment is, it's just a dead object. After all, it still needs people to exert its power as much as possible. Do you understand?" "Understood." Tang In nodded. You mean to kill Varen? Well, that's a good idea, but you gonna do it? No, you're going to do it. Huh? Tang In was stunned when he heard this. Are you kidding? I want to do it, but that guy is floating in the air. I can't fly. Waving his hand, Wu Ding smiled and pointed at Tang In. If I say you can do it, you can do it. As soon as he finished speaking, Tang In's expression suddenly froze. He looked at his feet that were slowly leaving the ground. Their two pale-colored shadowy swords were gradually lifting his body into the air. F***CK. Elder Lu, have I ever told you that you're really like a F***king quack? Chapter 882. God said, be related, so there's light in this world. Wu Ding said, you can do it, so Tang In flew up. No one would believe him if he said he wasn't a fraud. Little Tang, your speed is fast and your body movement is outstanding. With these two invisible sword intents as a fulcrum, I think no one could stop you in the air. But, pause for a while, Wu Ding looked up at the dark gold hammer that was slowly coming toward him. He narrowed his eyes and said, half a minute, I will help you hold on for half a minute. There was no need to say too much. Tang In understood that this was already the limit of what Wu Ding could do. If this continued, Wu Ding might be able to hold on, but he might have to use some means that would expose his true identity. Without a doubt, Wu Ding would not do that, because once his true identity was exposed, the uproar it would cause would be much greater than the uproar caused by Twain and the Divine Hall. Taking a breath, Tang In nodded solemnly. Half a minute, it's fine. Okay. Wu Ding nodded slightly. Then, he raised his right hand, and the golden-ringed blade hovered in front of him. He stretched out a finger and flicked it. Buzz. The dull and distant sound of metal clashing, mixed with the crisp sound of the golden rings, spread far and wide. Then, the golden light on the blade flowed like water and bloomed. A huge blade of light that seemed to be able to hold up heaven and earth slowly condensed and appeared in the void again. As soon as it appeared, it instantly split the surrounding silver light and blocked the path of the dark gold hammer. Go! Amidst these indifferent words, Tang In felt his body suddenly lighten, and the omnipresent pressure and restriction from before instantly vanished without a trace. He was instantly overjoyed, and he raised his head and laughed. Ha, go away! He stomped the invisible sword intense under his feet and soared into the air with a whoosh until he reached a height of more than 10 feet. Under the stunned gazes of the people in the sky, he stepped on the void and quickly rose into the air again as if he was climbing a ladder to heaven. Roar, stop him! Stop him! On the ground, the two bruised genuine void-grade cultivators were the first to recover. They instantly understood Tang In's intentions and roared anxiously. Following which, he also stomped on the ground and soared into the air. However, they had only risen a few feet when their expressions suddenly changed. They forcefully twisted their waists and turned around, quickly falling to the ground. At this moment, with a hissing sound, a strong gust of wind blew, and a ray of saber light flashed past their eyes, breaking through the air. If the two of them hadn't reacted quickly enough, they would have been cut into 4 pieces. Not far away, Wu Ding retracted his palm that was as straight as a blade and said indifferently, "You guys should stay." As soon as he finished speaking, he flicked his sleeves and waved his hand. A biting, cold gust of wind suddenly rose from the ground, instantly sending Sylvia and Owens, who were on the roof of the side hall, out of the range of the magical hammer. You can leave now. After casually doing all this, Wu Ding no longer paid any attention to it. He raised his head and looked at the slowly descending magic hammer and the huge blade light that had dimmed under its formless might. He frowned. Once again, he flicked his finger onto the blade. With a clang, this time it was like a great bell, and a golden ring instantly exploded. Ripples invisible to the naked eye rippled outwards. Hua, hua, hua. The roof of the side hall next to him, which was where Xiao Weian and the other had been standing, suddenly trembled, reflecting a silver luster. Then they all slid down the slope and fell to the ground with a loud bang. At the same time, above Wu Ding's head, The huge saber light that stood between the sky and the earth suddenly shone brightly. It was so dazzling that the dark gold magical hammer that had been falling at a constant speed could not help but pause, as if it felt a strong and invisible resistance. Blocking from afar, this was the strategy Wu Ding was now adopting. Although it seemed a little negative, it was actually the best way. It should be known that although Varen's strength was average, the divine art that came with the scepter of judgment could not be underestimated. If the magical hammer collided with the huge saber light head-on, Wu Ding would have no choice but to forcibly suppress it. At that time, it would be difficult to say whether he could keep his true identity. Of course, even if Wu Ding's strength was amazing, it was impossible for him to block the dark gold magical hammer by using such a method that was like binding his hands and feet. In the end, it was just a matter of half a minute. Everything depended on Tang Yun. Flying was the oldest dream of humans who walked on land. Now that Tang Yun was flying in the air against the wind, he felt especially good, so good that he could not control himself. Previously, because of the difference in cultivation system, although Tang Yun's strength was enough, he could only fool around on land. When they saw an enemy with the strength of a void realm flying in the air, most of them would sneer in disdain and secretly curse him, then lead him to the ground with infinite resentment and kill him or cripple him. Of course, the current Tang Yun absolutely could not think of a void realm birdman. He only felt that he was a carefree immortal who was walking on a sword. Wasn't that right? He was also stepping on a sword now, and there were two of them, although this was only a fulcrum and could not be controlled freely, let alone fly on a sword. It was still sending him to the sky, wasn't it? Ha! Thinking of this, Tang Yun could not help but feel happy and satisfied. He stood in the void and looked into the distance. What a view of the mountains and rivers, as beautiful as a painting. When he looked up, damn, under the silver brilliance of the sky, a brilliant Milky Way hung upside down in an instant. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that countless light swords were rapidly breaking through the air, whistling in bursts, and their power was truly awe-inspiring. It was the Temple Mage Regiment that had been scattered by Wu Ding before, although the two Void Realm warriors on the ground did not succeed in pursuing. Their warning roar still woke up the people in the sky. With the advantage of distance, the surrounding mages quickly blocked Tang Yun's flight path and attacked. With a shudder, Tang Yun instantly recovered from his happy dream, and only then did he remember the purpose of flying in the air. He could not help but wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. His figure flashed and disappeared in an instant before the light swords hit him. Paused for a while, he roared, "Over there! Attack!" The sky was unobstructed and there was nowhere to hide. As soon as Tang Yun flashed out of the range of the light swords, he was immediately discovered by the surrounding mages. Suddenly, all kinds of lightning, fireballs, wind blades, icicles, and other instantaneous low-level magic were thrown at him. The colorful scene was spectacular for a moment. However, it was a pity that before these magic were launched, Tang Yun had already stepped in the void and ran in a Z-shaped arc as if he was walking on flat ground. Not only did he successfully avoid most of the magic, but he also shortened the distance by a lot. When the second round of magic was launched, Tang Yun's figure once again completely disappeared from the sight of the mages. Where is he? Where is he? Don't panic, he can't be. Above, he's above. Attack! No, this guy's speed is too fast. Slow down. Use speed reduction magic. There was no doubt about Tang Yun's speed. If he did not rely on any means and only relied on his two legs, Wu Ding could only admit defeat in front of him, now in this vast sky, although Tang Yun could not move as freely as he did in Holy Light City. However, up, down, left, and right, the three-dimensional and vast, boundless space undoubtedly allowed his speed to be fully and terrifyingly displayed perfectly. Moving freely, he easily exceeded the limit that the human eye could bear. Just as the gathered mages were making a commotion, Tang Yun withstood all kinds of magic, and his figure flashed in the air like a ghost. When he appeared for the last time, he was already among the mages. In an instant, there was a whoosh. The mage's instinct, that is, the iron law that prevented warriors from getting close to their surroundings, caused some of the mages to cry out in alarm and subconsciously want to scatter and escape. Of course, there were also many clear-headed mages who were extremely clear about the situation at hand. Behind them were Varen and the other higher-ups of the temple who were casting spells. If they were broken through and Tang In successfully rushed over, the consequences would be unimaginable. They screamed at the top of their lungs, "Damn it! Everyone, don't panic. Hold up your shields. Don't scatter. Don't scatter." Some things could not be done even if one understood them. Tang In, who had rushed into the group of mages, was like a tiger in a flock of sheep. There was no match for him at all. Moreover, although time was of the essence, as the saying goes, sharpening the axe will not delay the work of cutting firewood. Tang did not mind using these clear-headed diehards as an example to others. His figure flashed in an instant, and with a wave of his hand, a demonic blood dagger pierced through the head of an old mage who was shouting loudly. One must keep a low profile. A faint voice sounded. With a bang, the seemingly sturdy magic shield was like a fragile eggshell under the blood dagger, unable to withstand a single blow and shattered into pieces. The blood dagger cut downwards and pulled horizontally. Chi! Large amounts of blood spurted out like a free river, instantly dyeing the surrounding area red. Then, a grizzled head with a horrified expression was thrown high and fell. A mage subconsciously reached out to catch it and paused. A hysterical scream of horror was heard. The grizzled head was thrown high again like a rubber ball, but this time no one caught it because there was more than one head in the sky. Under the gaze of the dark golden shadow, the blood dagger swept wildly, coming and going like a ghost. Twain's eyes were already bloodshot from the killing, and he went wherever there were the most people. Wherever he went, there would be a rain of blood. In an instant, severed limbs, clutching staffs, half of the head in fear, and all kinds of internal organs. Blood filled the sky, and severed limbs flew everywhere. It was as if Azura had suddenly appeared in the void, and it made everyone present dumbfounded. On the ground below, blood mixed with various corpses, and broken limbs fell like rain. The two genuine void-level warriors who triggered the fuse of this one-sided massacre looked up blankly, their expressions long sluggish. With their experience, they had long been tired of seeing blood rain and wind, so they should not have made such a fuss. However, such a cruel slaughter that could even be described as deranged still greatly challenged their minds, causing them to be stunned speechless for a moment. Breaking another golden ring with his finger, Wu Ding flicked his sleeves, sweeping away all kinds of debris falling from the sky, his expression somewhat complicated. He did not expect that just giving a little help would cause the other side to create such a bloody scene. He shook his head and sighed. Their killing intent is too strong. Wu Ding had such thoughts, not to mention Sylvia and Owens in the distance. They knew that Tang and had this ability, especially Sylvia. But when this ability was really translated into actual action, and the result was so tragic that it was unbearable to look at, the two of them could not help but be in a trance. If I had known this would happen before, opening his mouth, Owens unconsciously murmured, it would have been better to arm wrestle to decide the outcome. Of course, the so-called arm wrestle was only a suggestion. Even if Sylvia and Tang did not oppose it, and were even very much in favor of it. But it was impossible for Varen and the others to agree, even if they knew that it was impossible to win, because it would be a humiliation to the Millennium Temple. And since they did not want to be humiliated, it was simple. They could just use human lives to pay for it. In just a few short breaths, Tang In was like a blood-clothed Grim Reaper with a scythe on his shoulder, constantly emitting a strong aura of death, killing the temporarily gathered group of temple mages and causing them to flee in all directions, their screams shaking the sky. At this time, there were basically no mages who thought about stopping Tang In. They just wanted to escape, the farther the better. Of course, that was only the basics. There would always be brave warriors who were not afraid of death, especially in a religious atmosphere, and there were especially many such people. Hold on, hold on. Father God is watching us. The evil heresy will eventually be purified. Everyone hold on. While pointing at the dark golden shadow above, the black-robed mage roared at the top of his lungs, trying in vain to reorganize the defense line. But at this moment, be careful. Dodge. The mages not far away suddenly cried out in alarm. It turned out that after Tang In broke through a group of people, he must have also heard this roar. He half turned around and glanced faintly in this direction, then stepped on the void and rushed over quickly. Seeing this, the black-robed mage's expression suddenly changed. Then he gritted his teeth and stood in place. Instead of dodging, he wanted to raise his staff and chant a spell to attack. But for some reason, the spell that he was originally very familiar with became vague in his mouth, and he could not utter a complete syllable. The light staff seemed so heavy at this moment, and his trembling arms could not lift it at all. When he raised his head, a strong smell of blood assailed his nostrils. Tang In, whose clothes were completely soaked in blood, was already not far in front of him. They looked at each other, their expressions indifferent, and their eyes indifferent, so indifferent that it was as if he was looking at a dead man. His body stiffened, and the vague chanting stopped abruptly. The black-robed mage wanted to curse, wanted to strike with his staff, and had all kinds of thoughts, but the reality was that he just stood there in a daze, stupidly watching Tang and get closer and closer, and finally walked past him, without slowing down, without attacking, as if he did not see him at all. Tang indirectly walked past the black-robed mage and continued to run toward Varen and the others in the distance. He did not die, but the black-robed mage turned his head stiffly, and there was no ecstasy on his face after narrowly escaping death, but a dejected and defeated look. Weren't you very happy to shout? Weren't you very righteous? Didn't you say that the Father God was watching from above? Now that I, an evil heretic, am walking beside you, within reach, why don't you dare to curse? Why don't you dare to attack? Even when I have my back to you and am defenseless, you still don't dare to attack. Look, you are afraid. The hand holding the staff is trembling. This is the true face of a righteous disciple of the temple. Coward, hypocrite, killing you would dirty my sword. Facts spoke louder than words. Tang In used facts to slap the black-robed mage in the face, and also completely shattered the confidence of the surrounding mages to resist. However, not everyone chose to give up. While Tang In was entangled with the temple mages, 3 figures flew in the air, blocking in front of Varen and the other higher-ups, forming a triangular formation. Tang In glanced at them as he rushed over and frowned slightly. They were familiar. They were the 3 masters who had touched the threshold of void rank outside the city. Now, they had completely put away their contempt and clenched their spears, their expressions solemn. This is a bit troublesome. With this thought, Tang In rushed over like a whirlwind, ignoring the 3 people's subtle encirclement. When he was about 10 feet away, he suddenly stepped on the invisible sword intent under his feet, and his body instantly rose into the air. Opportunity! The 3 Do Chi experts raised their heads, and their eyes lit up at the same time. What they were afraid of was Tang Un's abnormal speed and ghostly body movement, but they were not worried about other aspects. Now that Tang Un took the initiative to jump, it was equivalent to temporarily abandoning his body movement speed advantage, which naturally surprised the 3 of them. The opportunity was fleeting, and there was no need to say anything. They, who had been through hundreds of battles, instinctively raised their spears, and the Do Chi was violent. The next moment, the spears whistled through the air in a fan shape, and the 3 of them all chose the same attack method, instantly sealing off all possibilities around Tang Un. Die ha! With a chuckle, Tang In, who had jumped to the top, rolled, and then the spears all over the sky stopped. The 3 masters only saw a sudden blur in front of their eyes, and Tang In's figure in the blood-red robe turned from 1 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8. In a short moment, there were more than 100 figures of Tang on in the air, vivid and lifelike. And for a moment, there was no difference at all. Hey, it's a new body movement. It's a bit interesting. Below, Wu Ding, who had been watching the battle, narrowed his eyes, and his eyebrows moved slightly, showing some interest. But before his voice fell, his eyes suddenly focused again in the air. Insignificant skill. Don't care about him. Attack. Attack. After a moment of shock, the master in the middle showed a fierce expression and decisively roared, taking the lead to attack with his spear. That's the logic. No matter how exquisite your body movement is, as long as you are still within the attack range, then I don't need to pay attention to you. I can just wave my spear, and I can always hit your body out. It had to be said that no matter how you looked at it, there was no problem with this master's thinking. However, empty kill, a faint voice like the sound of the wind drifted into his ears, and the master's body suddenly tensed up. Then an icy chill instantly spread from his tailbone to his brain and suddenly exploded. His whole body and mind felt as if they were in an ice cellar, and the chill was bone-chilling. In the next moment, his vision suddenly blurred, and his pupils shrank. Blood-robed Tang In, who was still in the air 100 feet away, had passed through the spear shadows in the sky and was right in front of him. Then a demonic bloody glow slanted upwards. There was no time to call for help, resist, or even blink. Fast. Too fast. It was really too fast. That Dochi warrior subconsciously raised his arm in front of his chest, but a certain part of his arm felt cold, and blood blossomed. Ugh! With a low groan, a swoosh sound, his arm flew far away, dripping with blood. Then his body was forcefully knocked away by a strong force, and he staggered back, losing his position. The triangular formation was instantly broken. After breaking through, Ting In, who no longer had any obstacles, laughed and looked up, facing the pale faces of Varen and the other high-level officials, and pounced on them like a ghost. Everyone, this is what you call a face-to-face talk. Chapter 883. Everyone, this is what I call face-to-face talk, he said with a smile, but his tone was not polite at all. But Varen and the others were stupefied and speechless when they heard this. A week ago, when a letter was delivered to the Northern Temple, they saw the words a face-to-face talk. At that time, they thought that the other party had given in. They did not think that it would be logical for them to want to kill him. More than 10 minutes ago, outside Holy Light City, when they heard the words a face-to-face talk again, they still thought it was a joke and dismissed it. Now, the other party was really in front of them and said that they would have a face-to-face talk with a smile. They were terrified. High up in the sky, the silver light was still boundless, covering heaven and earth. But this color that represented light could not give Varen and the others the slightest bit of warmth now. They only felt that the cold wind here was so bone-chilling that their bodies and minds trembled as they shivered after a pause. Suddenly, Varen waved his hands wildly, his old face pale, and shouted hysterically, "Stop him! Stop him!" The scepter of judgment was in Varen's hands, so it was impossible for him to move it. In this way, the only ones who could stop Tang In now were naturally the dozen or so higher-ups of the temple. They were not weak. At least their magic cultivation was much higher than the mages in the mage regiment of the temple. And it was worth mentioning that they only needed to stop. That's right, Varen had already accepted the reality. He only wanted to stop Tang In now, no matter what method he used. As long as he could delay him for a dozen seconds, he had absolute confidence in the power of the scepter of judgment. In fact, as Wu Ding had expected, the reason why Varen was reluctant to use this weapon of mass destruction was because he was constantly weighing the pros and cons. His original plan was to wait until the embarrassing situation of the temple was over, then secretly manipulate the holy weapon of light to create a miracle of the judgment of the gods to boost the confidence of the masses of believers. It was foreseeable that as long as the gods took the initiative to appear and punish some sinners, the rioting believers would certainly be appeased and the crisis of the Northern Temple would be resolved. But what he did not expect was that before he could find the right opportunity, Tang had come to kill him and forced him to use the holy weapon of light. In fact, it was not a big problem to use it in advance. Although it could not appease the believers, as long as the root of the problem, Tang was killed, the effect was not bad. However, what happened next was beyond his expectations. The middle-aged man who appeared out of nowhere was able to temporarily resist the power of the scepter of judgment. Instead, it caused him to be in imminent danger, and he urgently needed a dozen seconds to save his life. However, could these dozen or so higher-ups hold off Tang for more than 10 seconds? The answer was obvious. Although the strength of these higher-ups wasn't bad, they were just like the original leaders of this place, Byron and the others. They had been in high positions for a long time and lived like pampered princes, so they didn't have any fighting experience. Their actual combat strength was even worse than ordinary mages. The authorities of the Sacred Hall exchanged glances with one another. They could not help but tremble when they recalled the gory sight of the Sacred Hall mages. They could not control their aged bodies, let alone step forward to stop the attack. Time was of the essence. If it had not come, Tang would not be courteous. He stepped into the void and rushed up. He only glanced at them, raised his dagger, and pretended to be about to slash. They screamed in horror. The dozen or so higher-ups, who were like wooden stakes just a moment ago, suddenly scattered like rabbits who had been shot by arrows. They screamed and fled without looking back. They even forgot that they could use magic. They picked up their robes and ran wildly in the air like Tang. It was really ridiculous. Tang could not help but laugh happily when he saw this. He shook his head in disdain and rushed directly to Varen. The latter's old face alternated between red and white. He pointed angrily and shouted while stammering, "Trash, trash, trash. A bunch of trash." As soon as he finished speaking, his trembling right arm reached into his chest. He dug left and right, and finally, he took out a dagger with trembling hands. It was inlaid with a few shining rubies and sapphires. It looked really gorgeous. Tang, who had charged all the way without blinking, stopped in his tracks when he saw this. He looked at the dagger, and then at the panic-stricken Varen. He was stunned for a moment and scratched his head subconsciously. Forget about magic. You're playing with a dagger. It's done. Retracting his gaze, Wu Ding, who felt the pressure suddenly reduced, nodded. He reached out and held the hilt of the golden ring blade, whose 5 golden rings had been shattered. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Since the dark golden shadow could not take it anymore, it was naturally his turn to fight back. In the sky, the so-called playing with a dagger was naturally just a joke. Putting aside the fact that Varen did not know any close-range swordsmanship, the dazzling dagger was gorgeous enough to blind people. It should be a bribed gift that Varen had yet to sell, but could only be regarded as a work of art for appreciation. There was really not much hope for its actual combat effect. In fact, that was exactly what happened. In a flash, Tang was already behind Varen before he could hold the dagger tightly. At the same time, the Bloodblade dagger was pressed against Varen's neck. Good boy, the dagger is not something you can play with. Along Varen's arm, Tang deftly reached out and snatched the exquisite dagger. He spun it dangerously around his fingertips. See, at least do this before you can play with a dagger, understand? Varen, whose neck was slightly raised and body stiff, nodded subconsciously. His expression was bleak and terrified. Not bad, not bad. Tang patted Varen on the shoulder with a smile on his face. He looked satisfied that Varen was worth teaching. Stop. Let go of the bishop. Damn it. It was only at this moment that the warning roar filled with shock and anger belatedly arrived. It was the 3 combat energy masters. Even the one with the broken arm came over, bearing the pain and looking anxious. Tang ignored them. He looked up and narrowed his eyes at the staff of judgment that was hovering in the air and within reach. His eyes could not help but flicker slightly, as Varen and the dozen or so higher-ups of the church withdrew their magic. The staff of judgment now appeared much dimmer, with little silver brilliance. The towering dark golden shadow above also gradually blurred. It was no longer a threat and would dissipate on its own before long. However, this did not negate the fact that the Staff of Judgment was indeed an extremely rare item. Since it was a good item, naturally everyone wanted it. Tang Yen was no exception. However, after observing it for a few seconds, Tang Yen forced himself to withdraw his gaze. He sighed regretfully and stopped looking at it. This thing was not the Eye of Disaster. It was a treasure that had an owner and was very likely to be psychic. Tang had a vague feeling that once he touched this thing, he would be in extreme danger, and the consequences would be unpredictable. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed in Varen's eyes, but it was immediately replaced by panic. Feeling the chill on his neck, he forced himself to calm down. Tang, don't be impulsive. Let's talk. Yes, we can talk. We can talk about anything. Glancing at the combat energy masters who had surrounded him again, Tang chuckled. Ha, what's the matter? Do you agree to withdraw from the north now? No problem. I promise you, there's absolutely no problem. The more respected a big shot was, the more afraid they were of death. This was because compared to ordinary people, there were too many things they could not bear to leave behind. Varen was like this. Therefore, even though he knew that he did not have the right to make the church withdraw from the north, he did not hesitate to agree in order to stabilize Tang Yen and save his own life. However, Tang Yen shook his head slightly and grinned. No, the time is different, and the market is different. TSK, don't be impulsive, everyone. A friendly reminder, my dagger is not always so stable. He smacked his lips softly and shook the Bloodblade dagger. The three combat energy masters who were slowly approaching him suddenly froze. Don't come over. It's okay, whatever conditions you have, it's all negotiable. If that's the case. Tang Yen rubbed his chin and pretended to think about it. Then, under Varen's worried gaze, he nodded heavily. Well, since you're so sincere, I'll be frank. You don't have to withdraw from the north. I'll work a little harder and send you back to your hometown. Suddenly, a sharp scream resounded through the sky, and it was horrifying to hear. The three Chi warriors were stunned for a moment. Twain and Varen's silhouettes instantly disappeared from their sight. They looked down in shock, only to see Twain and Varen plunging straight down like a comet. In an instant, they had become an inconspicuous black dot. Chase. Soon, the horrified scream was covered by a long laugh that shook the sky. Tang Yen, who had once again experienced speed and passion, was very happy. In fact, he had never expected to drive the Temple of God out of the north this time. This was not a matter of strength, but of the political situation. Unless the political situation suddenly changed drastically, the Temple of God would never withdraw from the north. Therefore, Tang Yen's purpose in coming here this time was really simple. Razor had to be killed. Apart from that, his purpose was to humiliate the Temple of God. He could do whatever he could, as long as he tried his best. But what he did not expect was that although his goal was not high, reality gave him more. Not only did he have the opportunity to slaughter the Temple of God's mages, but he also caught the big boss, Varen. It was really a pleasant surprise. The speed of falling was naturally faster than the speed of rising, just like how falling was always easier than advancing. In just a short moment, a half-collapsed building below came into view. On the roof, there was a familiar sculpture with only 2 legs left. It was the central main hall from before. He raised his eyebrows and squinted his long and narrow eyes. Hey, open your eyes, take another look at this beautiful and loving world. Home is here. As soon as he finished speaking, he let go. Varen subconsciously opened his tightly shut eyes. In an instant, the blue tiles and vermilion eaves came into view. His eyes bulged, and he opened his mouth as if he wanted to shout something. Boom! There was a loud thunderclap. In another corner, the half-collapsed main hall was missing. Broken stones and bricks flew in all directions. No! The combat aura warrior who was one step slower hovered in midair and reached out his hand. He looked at the mighty main hall that was filled with smoke and dust and could not help but raise his head and roar. Without any protection, the outcome of falling from such a height could be imagined. Well, it could only be imagined. He believed that no one would be willing to witness it with their own eyes. I told you to arm wrestle, arm wrestle. Now someone's dead. In the distance, Owens licked his dry lips and muttered. He had mixed feelings. To be honest, he had been unhappy with Varen for a long time. Of course, Varen should feel the same way about him. Now that he had seen Varen fall into the main hall with his own eyes, there was no possibility of survival. It would be a lie to say that he was not happy. However, when he thought about how that annoying old face had turned into a pile of meat paste in an instant, he could not help but feel a little sad. After all, he was a member of the temple. What a tragic end. Sylvia felt the same, but she did something else. She pursed her lips and stared at the door of the main hall. After a while, the dust settled. Suddenly, with a bang, the half-collapsed door of the main hall flew out in the air, as if it had been kicked open from the inside. Then, cough, cough. Cough, cough. In the midst of coughing, a figure waved his hand to disperse the dust in front of him and walked out easily. Needless to say, this could only be Tang In. There was no one beside him, and Varen was nowhere to be seen. Of course, Tang In would not bring out a pile of meat paste just to show off. After taking a few steps, before he had left the main hall, Tang In suddenly stopped in his tracks, as if he had discovered something. He looked sideways at the stone ball next to his feet, paused, shook his head, and chuckled. With the tip of his foot, he grabbed the stone ball and walked out of the main hall. Immediately, a mocking voice spread from afar. I asked you to withdraw from the north, but you refused. You only know how to be afraid now that I have to kill you personally. You're really despicable. Obviously, this was a blatant attempt to draw hatred. It was also the purpose of Tang In's attack. The effect was good. In just a short moment, Tang In felt countless scorching, murderous gazes directed at him. If looks could kill, Tang In would have been smashed to pieces. Unfortunately, looks could not kill, so Tang In continued with an infuriating expression. Temple of Light? 1,000 years of heritage? Haha, that's all there is to it. He laughed and looked up at the dark golden figure in the sky that was gradually fading away. Once again, he raised his big middle finger. You're the god of light? Well, even if you're a god. Phew. He inhaled and exhaled. Suddenly, he took a step forward, his bloody clothes fluttering. His whole body swung his arm in a posture of great strength and beauty. In an instant, something flew up against the sky, breaking through the air with a sharp whistling sound. It was the stone ball. If someone had good eyesight, they would find that the stone ball was the head of the statue that had smashed down earlier. Sorry, you're a god, but you can't appear in the places I go in the future, because those places are— He swung his arm again. With a whoosh, a stream of light flashed by and accurately nailed the forehead of the statue between its eyebrows. It was Varen's extremely gorgeous and strange dagger. Forbidden zone of the gods. Get lost. As soon as he finished speaking, the head of the statue rose rapidly in front of everyone's eyes, going straight to the forehead of the dark golden figure. It pierced through again and dug out a round, empty hole, revealing the jade sky behind. Warm light seeped in, but it seemed out of place with the faint silver glow around it. There was dead silence. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the blank light. Shock, stupefaction, disbelief, all mixed together, and finally they were stunned speechless. A few breaths later, woo-woo-woo, faint cries could be heard from afar. It was the believers and residents by the riverbank. They did not know what had happened in the temple. They only saw that the dark golden statue, which had been majestic and solemn just a moment ago, was suddenly hit by a blank space between its eyebrows. As if it was dead, the figure of the statue gradually faded. When a god died, their faith naturally collapsed along with it. Therefore, the believers wailed and cried. However, the blow did not end there. Kill him. Kill this blasphemer. Kill. Extreme silence turned into extreme chaos in an instant. The entire temple seemed to be roaring, and trembling. All the clergymen were instantly enraged by Tang In's actions. Amidst the deafening battle cries, countless figures madly rushed toward him. But at this moment, suddenly, there was a bright and dazzling light. The faint silver glow between heaven and earth was instantly swept away. Instead, it was replaced by a golden light that filled the sky. It was a huge golden sword light that towered between heaven and earth. Wu Ding had made his move. Without the suppression of the dark golden magic hammer, the golden sword light burst out and directly shattered the dimming shadow of the god completely. It stood proudly and looked down on the world. The battle cries suddenly stopped. At this moment, the people of the temple remembered that there was such a killing god hiding nearby. They looked up at the majestic golden sword light and held their breath. The courage that they had just gathered in their bodies dissipated instantly. They could not help but feel fear and tremble all over. A long laugh shook the sky. "Ha ha, forbidden zone of the gods. Since this is the case, there is no need for this place of faith to continue to exist." Leaping into the air, Wu Ding held the golden sword high. Compared to the majestic sword light that could swallow the whole world, his figure seemed as small as an ant. But now, no one dared to underestimate this insignificant figure. In their fearful gazes, they saw Wu Ding half turn and push the huge sword light down like thunder. Boom, boom, boom. In the continuous sound of explosions, the golden light was everywhere. Rows of buildings collapsed together. All kinds of sounds were mixed together, as if the whole earth was trembling and wailing. He didn't intentionally hurt anyone. In fact, if there were still people with a clear head, they would realize that this tyrannical saber light continued to cut down the dark ravine from before. Rushing straight ahead, the earth dragon giant python appeared again and wreaked havoc. The only difference was that this earthen dragon giant python did not have any restrictions. It rushed straight ahead at will, dragging out a shocking deep ravine and expanding its territory until it crossed the whole temple and reached the bank of the small river. Splash! Huge waves surged up to the sky and slammed on both sides of the river. Water droplets splashed everywhere like rain. The scene was extremely spectacular. Then, in a short moment, the level of the entire small river suddenly dropped sharply. It turned out that after the north and south of the temple were connected, the river flowed backward and rushed into the deep ravine because of the terrain. In the end, it formed a T-shaped river, directly dividing the temple into two sides. The 1,000-foot temple was cut open by the sword, and the sky and clouds lingered together. This scene was like the work of the gods creating the world. It was incredible. Everyone present was dumbfounded and could not come back to their senses for a long time. Chapter 884. P.S. Raccoon is going to Zhejiang to see his little niece. I originally planned to go a few days later, but unfortunately, plans can never keep up with changes. Raccoon will get on the train later and arrive in the middle of the night. Alas, I can't save the manuscript. Let's make it 3,000 for one chapter today. Raccoon will see if I can make it up tomorrow. Sorry, I can't guarantee, but Raccoon will try his best. At noon, the sun was in the middle of the sky, hovering over the city. Wisps of black smoke rose in spirals. When they reached a certain height, they were blown away by the biting cold wind. Don't get me wrong, this was not smoke from cooking, although it was indeed lunchtime. But the bustling scene in the Holy Light City in the past had long disappeared, replaced by gloomy clouds and dead silence. As far as the eye could see, piles of ruins were everywhere in the city. It was a scene of devastation. That was the warm home of the believers and residents. But now the owner stood aside and looked at it foolishly. She could no longer find any sense of familiarity in it. After a long time, she couldn't help but cover her face and bow her head. Her soft sobbing drifted with the wind, faintly echoing over the city. This was not the most messy place. The most miserable place was the center of the city, the headquarters of the Northern Temple. Most of the divine palaces here that people used to talk about had now been reduced to ruins or simply disappeared. Vaguely, Some broken limbs and bloody corpses could be seen among them, exposed under the sun. It was creepy to see, but now no one would clean it up. The people who were still alive were lying or sitting like statues without the slightest vitality. The air of death seemed to be so strong that the sun in the sky seemed to be unable to bear it and quickly hid behind the flowing clouds. Then a large shadow suddenly fell. It looked as if this place, which had been favored by the gods for thousands of years, was now ruthlessly abandoned by the gods. It no longer had the glory of the past and was dim and dull. By the river, Sylvia sat quietly, looking at the slow-flowing water in front of her with blank eyes. The unique smell of the newly turned soil surrounded her nose. It was a little sobering, but also a little stale. He did it. He broke into the Temple of Light alone, left a mess, and then left. He really did it. As a member of the clergy, seeing the current state of the Holy Church, instead of thinking about revenge, they were shocked by the miraculous actions of the perpetrators. This was somewhat unreasonable. However, the reality was that Sylvia was not the only one who had such thoughts. The people in the temple who were slumped like statues also had similar thoughts. Perhaps the only difference was that they found it even harder to understand and completely unacceptable. We are the Temple of Light. We are the Temple of Light. We are the Temple of Light with thousands of years of history. Our influence is spread across every inch of Bran. Who was that Tangun? A little assassin with some strength and a few subordinates. But why did we lose? And he lost so miserably? I don't understand. What are you thinking about? Owens walked over slowly and lowered his head to look at the newly opened river that divided the temple into two. He smiled bitterly at first, then shook his head in self-mockery and said in a low voice, "Actually, overall, with the addition of such a river, the temple has become pretty good." This was the truth. Although the T-shaped river had divided the temple into two, the temple's layout was not very good. But as a whole, especially when looking down from above, the layout of the temple was not damaged much. On the contrary, it was more elegant and lively. If a few more arch bridges were laid on the river, it would be a nice view. Of course, after knowing the details of the matter, hearing these words again would be a little harsh. If these words were to spread to the ears of the people in the other temples, Owens would not have a good time. However, Sylvia certainly did not think so. She did not express any opinions on this matter. She just pursed her lips and said, "How are the lords over there?" The lords she referred to were naturally the 10 or so high-level members of the Holy Church. Although the embarrassing scene of them fleeing without a fight was really unbearable to look at. After Varen was turned into a pile of meat paste, the overall situation of the Holy Church had to be presided over by these noble bigwigs. How else could it be? Owen smiled disapprovingly. They're cursing and discussing how to take revenge on Tangin and the others. That's rare. Now, they seem to have a backbone. Obviously, this was not a compliment. Shaking his head, Owens continued, "Don't think about it. After Tangun's ruckus, the headquarters will definitely send people over to intervene. Well, this place is ruined. They won't be able to make a comeback in a short time." Sylvia nodded sadly. Her position was not low. Naturally, she knew what strategy the high-level members of the Holy Church would adopt. It could be said that although the Holy Church would not withdraw from the north after this battle, their vitality had been greatly damaged. The hope of making a comeback was also gone. They would not be able to make a comeback in a short time. Tilting her head, she heard the faint cries in the distance. She sighed softly and murmured, "In the end, the ones who will be hurt are the thousands of believers in the north." They were still holding on to hope. This can't be helped. Maybe it's a good thing. After this incident, since it's confirmed that it's difficult to kill Tang Yin, the focus of the high-level members' attention may be on the Holy Church itself. This speculation seemed to be somewhat reasonable, but Owens, who was familiar with the style of the high-level members of the Holy Church, said it at this time just to dispel Sylvia's negative mentality. After a pause, he shook his head slightly and changed the topic. "Speaking of believers, there are now some believers gathered outside the temple, hoping to get an explanation. Some of them ask to see you by name, saying that they only believe in you. Well, they're a little emotional, you see. Not to mention the huge commotion in the Holy Church just now. Even if their homes were destroyed for no reason, the believers would also come over to ask for an explanation. As for only looking for Sylvia, it had to be said that the recent actions of Sylvia and the Puritans had indeed given the believers a strong confidence and a positive impression. Compared to the Puritans who did not show up all year round, the well-known Sylvia was undoubtedly more acceptable to the believers. To some extent, the current Sylvia had become the symbol of the positive image of the Holy Church. So once something happened, the believers trusted Sylvia the most. Let's go. Let's go now. Sylvia's eyes suddenly lit up when she heard this. She quickly got up and turned around very decisively. Hey, wait. You're not going to tell the truth, are you? No matter what, you have to think about the wording. Owens hurriedly pulled Sylvia, his tone anxious. It was no wonder that he had such a big reaction. It was good to tell the truth, but it might not be appropriate to tell the complete truth, and not everyone would like to hear it. For example, if he told the truth now, about this matter. This is because our calculations failed, and we were tricked instead. Archbishop Varon is dead, and the Holy Church has been cut in half, but this is no big deal. What? Your house was destroyed by us. Oh, that's just a momentary lapse in our people. Well, don't worry about these details. Unimaginable. If those believers heard the truth, what kind of wonderful expressions would they have? Frowning slightly, Sylvia naturally knew what Owens was thinking. She replied snappily, I'm not an idiot. Oh, is that so? Cough, cough, well, I still believe you. It's just that. Owens, who had accidentally told the truth, saw Sylvia tighten her grip on the spear in her hand. He was suddenly sweating profusely and stammering. Just what? Sylvia's expression was unusually calm, but she raised the tip of the spear a little more. Obviously, if Owens did not give a satisfactory answer, the result would be unimaginable. Owens suddenly raised his eyebrows as he thought of an excuse. He said hurriedly, but before that, shouldn't we first consider the words that Tang In left behind? Originally, Sylvia had planned to teach this blabbermouth Owens a lesson, but when she heard this, she could not help but be startled, and her expression softened slightly. Seeing this, Owens scratched his head and wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. What? You forgot so quickly? Before Tang In left, didn't he tell us to be careful of the higher-ups of the temple of God's headquarters? Of course, this does sound like he's trying to sow discord, but I have to say that this possibility is not small. And, judging from his relationship with you, with us, he might have received some news. In short, we can't be careless about this matter. Phew! After saying these words intermittently and dripping with sweat, Owens heaved a sigh of relief, as if he had just finished a battle for 3 days and 3 nights. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. Damn it, every word he said was full of holes. Can't we still have fun together? Sylvia naturally did not know about Owens's unspoken criticism and did not care. She pursed her lips and frowned, thinking about how the temple of gods had been cut in half. When everyone was stunned, Tang In had taken the opportunity to escape. However, he did not directly rise into the air. Instead, he sent a message to her from 10 feet away, telling her to be careful of the higher-ups of the temple of God's headquarters, and then disappeared. This was not trying to sow discord. Although there was no evidence, somehow, Sylvia had accepted this message in her heart. But be careful of the higher-ups of the temple of gods. Are they trying to frame me again? Why? It had to be said that perhaps even Sylvia herself did not realize that unknowingly, she was no longer the simple head knight who only obeyed the orders of the higher-ups of the temple of gods. If someone had told Sylvia 2 years ago that the higher-ups of the temple of gods wanted to harm her, Sylvia would have immediately picked up her gun and killed this evil heretic with evil intentions. But now, after being framed by Byron and others, Sylvia was a little sensitive to this kind of thing. After a moment of silence, she took a slight breath and strode away. Let's go see the believers first. Then this matter? You go and investigate. You're more suitable for this kind of thing than me. After a pause, Sylvia did not turn back and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "Sorry. Please let me be a deserter this time." Owens was stunned, then nodded and smiled. "It's my pleasure." Chapter 885. P.S. If there are no accidents, there are still 2 more chapters. In Time is of the essence, bless this lousy raccoon. At this time, hundreds of miles away from Holy Light City. Elder Wu, why were we in such a hurry to leave just now? Haha, why I can't bear to leave. That's not it. Big boss, well, Varen has been killed, and the place has been ruined. Of course, it's reasonable for us to leave. Tang and touched his nose and paused for a moment. Then he shrugged and said, "Well, I'm a little reluctant. After all, the opportunity to humiliate the temple is really rare." Twain was indeed a little reluctant to part with him. Just now, Wu Ding had split open the temple with his sword and completely destroyed the morale of the people of the temple. He should have done whatever he wanted, but Wu Ding pulled him away. It was like a strong man who had not tasted meat for 3 months had finally taken off the clothes of a peerlessly beautiful woman with great difficulty and stretched out her slender legs. What happened next was naturally, without any suspense. However, in the next moment, the strong man turned around and left. This was not King scientific at all. "I'm also a little reluctant." Nodding, Wu Ding said calmly, After living for a long time, there will always be some special means, such as me. And the temple has stood on the continent for thousands of years. Its foundation is naturally more profound. This is not as simple as ancient arrays, holy weapons, and so on." Tang Yin frowned. For example, long-distance teleportation arrays. Wu Ding explained, then shook his head. "This kind of array that can travel thousands of miles in an instant is extremely expensive to build. There are only a few in the entire empire. But one thing is for sure, there must be such an array in the northern temple or near the temple." Tang could not help but be surprised when he heard this. Then why didn't they use it before? He shook his head. They already used it. As far as I know, half a month ago, there were no void-level martial artists here in the northern temple. Looking away slightly, Wu Ding naturally would not elaborate on why he was so concerned about the strength of the northern temple half a month ago. Tang also did not care about this detail. He secretly pondered for a few seconds, raised his long eyebrows, and suddenly became angry. "Damn, so they don't think highly of me." Did the temple look down on Tang Yin? Of course not. At least in the eyes of the upper echelons of the northern temple. The huge array they had arranged this time, as well as the 3 void-grade warriors who had been specially transferred from the headquarters using the long-distance teleportation array, and so on, were already extremely high in their opinion of Twain. They were planning to crush him with force and at the same time show off their skills to their believers. However, he did not expect that in the end, even his trump card, the sacred weapon of light, would be used, and he would still be defeated so horribly, of course. If they only looked at the results, the Temple of Light had really underestimated Twain this time. The experts they sent were seriously not enough. But then again, where could they find another top expert of Bulin to send? After chatting for a while, just as Tang said, now that the big boss was killed and the scene was ruined, the next step was naturally to separate. After all, Wu Ding's performance as a middle-aged man with a simple face was too eye-catching. Even if the people in the temple did not think of it for a while, they would eventually have some guesses in their hearts. So after this matter, Wu Ding needed to rush back to the brand capital immediately. This trip to the north was not a fruitful one, but it really surprised me again and again. Although there are some regrets, but looking at the blurry Holy Light City in the distance, Wu Ding withdrew his gaze and waved his hand with a smile. "Haha, I'm still happy." Listening to these words that obviously carried a sense of farewell, Tang In also chuckled. "Ha, as long as you're happy. You're busy, otherwise I would definitely take you around. For example, the scenery in Mountain Creek City is very good. Ha, forget it, the temple will go crazy." After being stunned for a while, Wu Ding could not help but shake his head and laugh. Of course, he knew about Mountain Creek City, and he also knew that this city had the reputation of being the holy city of the north. If he split the northern temple in half and then smashed the scene in the holy city of the north, well, presumably, even if the temple wanted to lie low, they would instantly be so angry that they would jump out of their nest and come out in full force to find Tang, and even if they had to dig 3 feet into the ground. After chatting for a while, Tang In and Wu Ding talked and laughed casually, and the atmosphere was very harmonious. However, the slightly strange thing was that although the two of them were saying goodbye, neither of them simply turned around and left. Of course, this could be seen as reluctance to part. However, was the relationship between Tang In and Wu Ding so deep? Gradually, this strange feeling became more and more obvious. However, Tang In and Wu Ding's expressions did not change in the slightest. They were like children who were about to be separated, exhorting each other again and again, reluctant to part. This scene was just short of a tear-filled handkerchief for the final sublimation. It was touching and strange. Finally, when the two of them changed the topic from parting to catching up in the capital, and then to the weather today, the awkwardness and strangeness overwhelmed the harmony. The atmosphere gradually became cold, and the smooth conversation began to have short intervals from time to time. At this time, Tang In's expression was still calm, but if someone who knew him was here, looking at the frequency of him subconsciously touching his nose, they would know that the current Tang and was not as calm as he appeared to be on the surface. It seemed like he was a little panicked and anxious. Compared to the two-faced Tang In, Wu Ding was much more straightforward. He directly put the hesitation in his eyes, and his eyes flashed slightly, as if he was making a choice and considering the pros and cons. Then, he seemed to have noticed Tang In's abnormality. There was a little playfulness in his eyes, and he answered the question indifferently. Although the light was still warm, there was never a lack of biting cold wind in the unobstructed mountain range. It was not cold, but it was definitely comfortable. However, it was in such an environment that the clothes on Tang In's back began to gradually become wet. At this time, suddenly, Tang In's brows cleared, and he seemed to be relieved. He smiled easily and said, "Ha! Elder Wu, you have a high position and power, and the safety of the empire is at stake. I won't keep you today. However, before I leave, I have a gift for you. I hope you won't refuse it." Raising his eyebrows, Wu Ding was a little surprised when he heard this. Then he felt something and turned his head to squint. He saw a figure rushing over from the distant hills like a galloping horse. It was the burly man whose arm was broken by one sealant. And he seemed to be called David. The person who came was indeed David. Of course, the broken arm had already been restored. However, he seemed to have run for a long time now. When he got closer, he could hear the heavy breathing of a cow. He looked as if he had just climbed out of the water. He was drenched in sweat, and his whole body was steaming. "Boss! Huff! The thing is here." "Huff!" Tang In quickly walked up and took the thing wrapped in newspaper from David's hand. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Thank you. Take a rest and catch your breath." Turning around, he met Wu Ding's puzzled gaze. Tang In's lips curled up slightly. He took a few steps forward, opened the outer layer of the newspaper, and handed it over. "Elder Wu, this is a little gift, and it's a little shabby. Please don't take it to heart." It was indeed a little gift. There were a few crispy yellow pancakes inside the newspaper. There were some sesame seeds on them, and the appearance was not bad. This was a special kind of pancake in a city in the north. It was crispy and sweet. It was a cheap and delicious food that was rarely seen among the commoners. Of course, no matter how delicious it was, it couldn't hide the fact that this thing was indeed shabby, extremely shabby. Even the nobles and rich merchants disdained to buy it, let alone give it to the sword god Wu Ding. But now, Wu Ding lowered his head and looked at these crispy yellow pancakes. He couldn't help but stare blankly. After a pause, he slowly raised his head. His eyes were as calm as an ancient well. He met Tang In's smiling eyes that were full of sincerity. For a moment, he was silent. The two of them looked at each other quietly with a distance of less than 10 feet between them. At this moment, the cold wind in the mountains seemed to have noticed something unusual. It obediently quieted down and didn't dare to cause trouble. Silence. Silence. Dead silence. Tangen's eyes drooped slightly. He bowed slightly. The hand that was holding the pancake didn't move at all. He put on a humble and sincere appearance of a junior. Wu Ding's eyes became more distant and deep. There wasn't a single ripple. It was like a pool of stagnant water, or the calm sea before a storm. David looked around with his eyes wide open. He didn't know what was going on. He only saw that Tang handed over the crispy yellow pancake. Wu Ding lowered his head and looked at it. He didn't take it. Then, the two of them became like this. If the mountain wind could sense the abnormality, David could naturally sense it too. Feeling the deep and biting killing intent, David swallowed his saliva with difficulty. He looked at Wu Ding with a head full of question marks. What's going on? Could it be that the pancake is too shabby and he's angry? It can't be. Although he was very puzzled, David didn't need to think about it at all. He directly stepped forward and stood behind Tang, and there was no doubt about it. Not to mention that the one standing here was the sword god Wu Ding. Even if it was a real god, David would stand by his boss's side without hesitation. This had nothing to do with right or wrong, good or evil, or even loyalty, affection, and so on. It was only a matter of habit. A habit became a natural habit. David's feet moved, and the atmosphere immediately changed a little. Tang Nun's sleeves trembled, and Wu Ding's fingertips trembled. In the next moment, nothing happened. Both of them seemed to be forcibly restraining something. Immediately, Tang Yin slowly waved his hand without looking back. David's feet paused in midair, but he still took them back. However, the gaze he shot at Wu Ding was gloomy and filled with ill intent. Because in that instant, he had indeed sensed a dense killing intent that flashed for a moment. The sword god wanted to kill his boss. Why? At this time, sigh. Wu Ding was the first to withdraw his gaze. He looked up at the sky and sighed. I still want to. His words were a little abrupt and inexplicable, but Tang In seemed to understand. He thought about it and advised very seriously, forget it. It's not worth it. He nodded in agreement. Yes, it's not worth it. Wu Ding took a slight breath and decided on something. He reached out and took the crispy yellow pancakes wrapped in newspaper. He smiled and said, thank you. Well, it's getting late. Let's part ways here. Take care. Tang In bowed to see him off. The real moment of parting was actually so simple. It was as if the wrangling just now was for the sake of these crispy yellow pancakes. It was really unbelievable. Of course, only the two of them knew the real reason. Wu Ding left very simply. He took a few steps and soared into the sky. After a few breaths, he disappeared into the horizon. After a while, David saw that Tang In was still bowing to see him off. He endured for a while, but he still couldn't help but scratch his head and ask, Boss, he's gone far away. Where you, Before he finished speaking, he saw Tang In take a deep breath and look up. His face was covered with sweat. He seemed to want to straighten his body, but then he staggered and fell straight down. David was shocked when he saw this. He rushed forward to support him. Boss, what's wrong? Where are you hurt? Damn it, is it that Wu Ding? F***CK. Bullshit sword god. He only knows how to scheme behind people's backs. He roared. Seeing Tang In like this, David didn't even think about it, and thought that Wu Ding was behind it. After all, the sword god's strength was too shocking. It was understandable that he had some unknown sneak attacks. However, Tang In, who was supported by David, wiped the sweat on his forehead. He first heaved a big sigh of relief, then waved his hand and said, It's nothing. I'm just a little nervous. My legs are just numb. Paused for a while, he slowed down and grinned as if he had a toothache. His face was filled with joy. Damn, it's really easy to invite the devil in, but hard to send him away. Fortunately, I was prepared. Otherwise, I would have really fallen in. Chapter 886. In the wilderness, Two figures were walking silently with a few steps between them. Junior brother. Junior brother. What's wrong, senior brother? Stopping and looking at Wincillin, who was in a daze, Haita frowned and sighed in his heart. It's nothing. It's been a week. Are you still thinking about that battle? No. Wincillin subconsciously wanted to shake his head and deny it, but looking at Haita's worried expression, he lowered his head. I can't hide it from senior brother. I've embarrassed the sect. Junior brother, you're wrong. Haita shook his head. Master once said that my sword god sect is never afraid of losing face, only of losing face. It doesn't matter if you lose, just do your best. No one will blame you. Besides, didn't Master lose by one move? So you don't have to think too much about it. I know. Tightening his grip on the purple spear, Wincillin suddenly raised his head with an agitated expression. I just can't accept it. That Tang Yin, if you give me another chance, you will definitely do something. With a deep voice, Haita's expression suddenly became extremely stern. Junior brother, I know your character. But a loss is a loss. If you lose, you have to be able to afford to lose. On the battlefield, in a life and death battle, you can't expect the other party to give you another chance. Since he said this, it was a reprimand. Although Haita's talent was average, he still had the dignity of senior brother. Hearing this, Wincillin also knew that he had made a big mistake this time, so he quickly nodded in agreement. Of course, he might not be as convinced as he was on the surface. Wincillin always felt that the reason why he was defeated was because of Tang Un's shameless sneak attack, and also because he was careless. If he had chosen to fight in the air at the first moment, it would have been easy to take care of Tang, and Haita naturally knew the character of his junior brother, who was more ambitious than the sky. He could even roughly guess what the other party was thinking. Shaking his head slightly, he softened his tone. Don't blame senior brother for lecturing you. Whether you accept it or not, that Tang Yin defeated you is a fact. Moreover, you only know that Shifu has a very high opinion of him, but you don't know to what extent. Well, if he's given enough time, he might grow to be on par with Master. Don't look at me like that, Master said it himself. Master really said that. After the initial shock, Wincellin's heart was filled with dejection, and he felt rather upset. Even though he believed that he was a genius and rarely met a worthy opponent in the world, he was still a genius. However, he didn't dare to think that he could reach the level of his invincible sword god. But now that Tang Yin, who seemed very shameless to him, had actually gotten his master to admit it personally. Glancing at the dazed Wincillin, the corners of Haita's mouth rose slightly, and he continued, Of course, junior brother, you don't have to belittle yourself. That Tang Yin is only a possibility, but you're different. With your talent in the martial Tao, as long as you concentrate on cultivating, it's only a matter of time before you defeat him. And don't forget, your master is the sword god. So if others have a 30% chance of being on par with the sword god, you have at least a 60% chance of becoming the sword god. His tone was resolute and inspiring. This was also the so-called raising and suppressing method of controlling people. If you want to raise, you have to suppress first. Wincillin's talent was amazing, and his strength was even more astonishing, but he was still a hot-blooded and impulsive young man. Hearing this, he was greatly encouraged. He immediately clenched his fist and waved it in the air. Senior brother, you are right. I'm not worse than anyone. As long as I concentrate on cultivating, no one can stop me, not even Tang Yin. I will remember this battle first. When I break through again and have the confidence, I will come back to find him and have a fair fight. Hearing this, the corners of Haita's mouth rose slightly, and he nodded with relief. That's how it should be. But, as if he thought of something, Haita hesitated for a moment, and then said, Don't worry too much about Tang Yin. Maybe he is already dead. Wincillin was shocked. What why? He is too dangerous for Bran, so dangerous that even Master can't control him. Haita sighed and shook his head slightly. In fact, Master wanted to kill him before this. Of course, there is also appreciation. For example, he invited him to be a guest on the mountain, But unfortunately, he refused, so there was that one move bet. You also know the result. He won, and Master appreciated him even more. Pause for a while. I have to say that Tang In is indeed a genius. The martial Dao he walks on is completely different from us, and even from the martial artists in the world. Of course, it is easy to stand out, but this also means that there are no fellow travelers, no successful precedents. He can only rely on himself to explore, just like crossing the river by feeling the stones. One wrong step, and he will be beyond redemption. But now, not only is he not beyond redemption, but he seems to have found the martial Tao that belongs to him alone. Creating something out of nothing and establishing a sect, he is a grandmaster-level figure. Many of his fighting concepts, original martial arts, and so on, Master praised him endlessly. But the more he praised, the more he appreciated, the more determined Master was to kill him. Previously, because of the one-move bet, Master did not want to break his promise, so he did not make a move. But after leaving the range of the temple and ending the bet, it is hard to say whether Master will continue to keep him. As he spoke, Haita shook his head slightly, obviously not thinking that Master would continue to keep Tang In. On the side, when Silin opened his mouth, his expression was both depressed and somewhat relieved. He was depressed because if Master made a move, then he naturally would not have the chance to take revenge on Tang In. He was faintly relieved that the shameless guy was finally dead. In this way, his talent was still the most outstanding. As soon as his voice fell, suddenly a slightly self-deprecating voice was heard. You guessed wrong this time. Haita, he doesn't need me to keep him. Master, Haita, and when Silin turned around at the same time and called out together. Then, in a flash, a middle-aged man with a simple face appeared in front of them. Needless to say, this was naturally Wu Ding, who had not yet removed his disguise. He stretched out his hand and handed over the newspaper in his hand. Come, try it while it's hot. Huh? Haita looked at the crispy yellow pancake in a newspaper and was stunned. Isn't this the pancake we accidentally ate in that small town when we first came to the north? When Silin subconsciously took one and said in surprise, Yes, I still remember that Master liked the taste of this kind of pancake very much. When you left that small town, you took a lot of it with you. But didn't you finish it long ago? Waving his hand, Wu Ding said, Don't guess, this is a little gift from Tang In when I parted ways with him. Hee, what a little gift. Oh, Haita subconsciously nodded when he heard this. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed through his mind. His eyes widened and he opened his mouth. No, how did he know about this pancake? Damn it, he investigated us. Master, you were threatened? Taking a bite of the pancake and nodding, Wu Ding's expression was calm. You guessed right this time. Here, I'll reward you with a pancake. At the same time, Boss, did you just threaten the sword god? Between the mountains, a shocked roar slowly echoed. David's eyes were as wide as copper bells. His expression was much more interesting than Haita's. Of course, this was normal. After all, from the tone of these two sentences, one was that the Master was threatened, and the other was that the boss threatened others. The emotional color was naturally different. He waved his hand lightly. It's not a threat. It's just that everyone reached a consensus in a friendly atmosphere. At best, it can only be called intimidation. Coercion. Coercion. Well, that's about it. Does it sound better? Of course, it wouldn't sound good, but that was the truth. Tang In did send people to investigate all the whereabouts of Wu Ding and the others after they came to the north. There was no other way. Tang In had long known about Wu Ding's killing intent. Naturally, he had to leave a backup plan to save his life. Of course, this work was not simple. After all, Wu Ding and the others came incognito, and basically no one knew them. Fortunately, there was still Philip. When he came, he provided the information of Tang In's location to Wu Ding and the others. Now, he also provided the whereabouts of Wu Ding and the others to Tang In. He was a double spy, so don't look at it as just a few shabby pancakes. In fact, the real meaning was to tell Wu Ding that he had completely grasped their whereabouts. If I can find a flatbread you like to eat, I can also find a witness who has seen you. So, if you don't want this information to be passed to the temple headquarters, shouldn't your old killing intent be put to rest? Of course, Wu Ding could also choose to fight to the death. With his strength, if he was determined, it would not be difficult to kill Tang In and the gray space. But as Tang In had just said, it was not worth it. No matter how strong Wu Ding was, it was impossible for him to uproot Tang In's forces in an instant. After all, it was a very real problem whether he could find them completely. And once the temple headquarters knew that the person who had cut the northern temple in half was Wu Ding, it would be a big joke. That would be fun. The Temple of Light was extremely powerful and had a frightening foundation. Wu Ding's reputation was extraordinary. When he shouted, many people responded. Once the two sides went to war, it was very likely that the country would fall into chaos. It was still not worth it, as long as one was rational and could distinguish the importance of the matter. The choice most people would make was self-evident. Of course, people like Rode did not count because rationality was like a luxury to such people. Fortunately, Wu Ding was not such a person. He, who cared about the safety of the empire, almost did not need to consider such a choice. No wonder Wu Ding was full of killing intent just now. If it were me, even if I couldn't kill him, I would at least beat him up to vent my anger. After hearing the details, David could not help but shake his head and sigh. Haha, so you are David, and he is Wu Ding. Tang Yin shrugged and spread his hands. They are people of status. How can they be so shameless like us? Even if we lose, we have to seize every opportunity to take a bite out of them first. Haha, I think this is pretty good. David scratched his head and laughed good-naturedly. Then, he thought of something and could not help but frown. But boss, won't we completely offend Wu Ding by doing this? What will we do in the future? It is because of the future. Tang Yin sighed and squinted at the western sky. After the Gray Coat Army comes out, it is impossible for Bran not to be in chaos. If things get serious, Wu Ding will still attack us. So, if we offend him, then so be it. It will happen sooner or later. Shaking his head, Tang In continued. After we go back this time, let the secret organization infiltrate the south. It would be best if they could get me the map of the capital of Bran and the palace castle. Haha, I can't beat you, but it doesn't mean I can't restrict you. Elder Wu, let's meet again in the south. How cunning and sly. First, he asked Master to help him kill his way into the temple. Then he used this as a means of blackmail. How shameless. Cunning, and shameless. Clearly, Winston had a lot of opinions about Twain's actions. However, Wu Ding was quite calm. Forget it. Killing our way into the temple was the content of the bet. He could set up a chain of traps for me to go in. It is also his ability. There is no need to say more. At this time, Haida, who had been thinking, suddenly frowned and said, a week is too short. Tang Yin can't find anything valuable, let alone know about the bread. Unless, Philip, it must be Philip. Winston was not stupid. With a little bit of speculation, he immediately confirmed the biggest suspect. He hammered his palm. No wonder when we set off before, he insisted on staying in the north for a few more days. Really, he wanted to curse, but when he looked at his master Wu Ding, he quickly shut his mouth. Forget it. It has already happened. It is useless to pursue the matter now. Speaking of Philip, Wu Ding also had a headache. Perhaps, when we chose to let him lead the way, it was equivalent to facing the current situation. Then, are we just going to let it go? That Tang Yin, Winston asked unwillingly. Of course not. He even gave us a few pieces of bread. Haha, just kidding. This matter is already over. It is meaningless to talk about it. As for Tang Yin, well, I have a feeling that we will meet again. We will see then. With a wave of his hand, even if Winston or Sea Tower had any different opinions, they could only shut up now. Our top priority now is to return to the capital of Bran as soon as possible, so that the temple will not find any flaws. Hey, the spatial fluctuation should be nearby. Why can't I see it? Strange. Looking at Wu Ding looking into the distance, Haida could not help but be surprised. Master, what are you looking for? I am looking. I found it. It is quite cunning. It is actually built here. Wu Ding was suddenly overjoyed. He squinted at a hidden canyon and waved his hand. Let's go. Cover your faces. This time, we will take the long-distance transmission array back. Winston was stunned when he heard this. He stared blankly at the tight security in the canyon. If he guessed correctly, this should be a material transfer station for the temple. But who would have thought that there was an extremely precious long-distance teleportation array hidden here? He stuttered. But this is the teleportation array of the North Shrine headquarters. What if it sends us directly to the Shrine headquarters? Not if, it is for sure. Wu Ding seemed to have noticed something before. He said with certainty. Then he touched the perfectly disguised chin on his face. This is a rare opportunity. The temple is always heavily guarded. If we force our way in from the outside, the possibility of success is too low. But if we suddenly burst out from the inside, it is much simpler. It is just a matter of a sword. I will show my face before I disappear. I think no one will suspect me. Well, that is it. Winston and Haida were speechless. Even though they knew that their master had always disliked the temple, they did not expect it to be to this extent. Not long ago, they had just destroyed the Northern Temple headquarters. Now, they wanted to destroy the temple headquarters again. This was the rhythm of directly offending them to death in one step. Cover your face and get ready to go, Wu Ding said eagerly as he took out the golden-ringed sword from somewhere. Haida tore off the cloth on her body to cover her face. As she tied it, she shook her head and sighed. What a sin. Let's go quickly. Of course, Tang En did not know what was happening behind him. He also did not know the wonderful expression of the Pope in the temple headquarters when he saw a huge sword suddenly appear out of thin air and cut horizontally, tearing off the roofs of countless buildings along the way. He was now in the carriage on the way back, in the system space. Ding! Obtained 200 experience points. Ding! Obtained experience points. Ding! System upgraded. Ding! Obtained 2,000 blood chi. Ding! Obtained blood chi. Ding! Blood chi upgraded. F***CK. Although Tang En had expected that he would gain a lot from this operation, he did not expect this result. It turned out that both the system and blood chi had upgraded. It had been a long time since he had heard any news of leveling up. Now, leveling up his blood chi would easily require hundreds of thousands of blood chi if he did not have any powerful enemies. It would be difficult for Tang En to level up even if he went on a killing spree and abused countless noobs. Compared to Vitality, which still had some hope, the system level was even more torturous. Tang En had almost forgotten when was the last time he had leveled up. From this point, one could see how much of a scam it was. Of course, what happened this time was indeed different from the past. From the long-term mission, Twilight of the Gods, Tang En's operation this time had slapped the temple's face until it was swollen. With such a hard-working performance, if they did not give more experience points, Tang En would have to consider using the purple cannon next time. As for blood chi, other things aside, just the spectacular scene of Tang En mercilessly slaughtering the temple's mages in the air, and the broken limbs and blood pouring down like a torrential downpour, was a great reward. The upgrade of both the system's level and blood chi undoubtedly made Tang En feel as if he was floating in the clouds. He basically did not hear the system's synthesis sound after that. It was not until he pulled open the Assassin's panel that Tang En realized that he had gained another medal, King of Destruction. The name was awesome enough, but its function was similar to the Blasphemer and other medals. It was completely useless. Of course, Tang En did not expect them to have any heaven-defying function. He was just thinking about what the old butler said before. Collect more medals and then exchange them with the system. After a brief glance, Tang En excitedly pulled the Assassin's panel to the top and looked at it one by one. System level, first-class assassin code, Tang En experience points, 130005000 blood chi, 320000800000. When he first looked at it, Tang En was in a good mood. Seeing that the system's level had been upgraded from professional assassin to first-class assassin, he felt a great sense of accomplishment. When he looked again, even after the upgrade, there was still a lot of experience points and blood-chi left. He was even more satisfied. However, Tang En's expression became a little ugly. He scrolled faster and faster, and the more he scrolled, the more he grimaced, "Old butler." Tang En frowned and turned around to face the old butler, who was resting with his eyes closed a dozen steps away. He spread his hands and asked, "Why are there so few new skills this time?" "Only 2. Damn it, there's still one less. Where's the obliterating conscience from before?" The old butler explained faintly, "With your current state of mind, obliterating conscience is basically useless. Plus, you don't want to cultivate, so the system will naturally help you retrieve it." Tang En was stunned when he heard that. "Quite humane. Well, let's not talk about this first. Why are there so few skills after the upgrade this time?" "It's very simple," the old butler said calmly. "Because you're now a first-class assassin." "Can we speak more plainly?" "Yes," the old butler said. "The system skills in the past were very good assistants for you. But for a first-class assassin, they're a burden. In fact, you should be vaguely aware that you rarely use skills now when you're fighting, right?" That's because I rarely meet opponents who are worthy of my use." Tang En grinned. Of course, he knew that the system could not be changed. Plus, he got a satisfactory explanation, so he didn't care about it anymore. He turned his attention to the 2 new skills and smacked his lips. TSK. Frenzy Feast. Permitha Teleportation. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.